Chapter 40-59, The Devil. The moment Yun Chujo took out her large kitchen knife, not only Wan Pengcheng, even the surrounding disciples were shocked and hurriedly dodged. Was this Yun Chujo crazy? Unexpectedly, Yun Chujo did not attack Wan Pengcheng. Instead, she held the large kitchen knife and directly retreated to the back of the crowd. Then, she placed the large kitchen knife in front of her and continued to mumble, human law, earth law, heaven law, Tian Dao, Dao law, and nature. Since everything in the world has its own laws, then what is Tian Dao? Those who were close to Yun Chujo immediately felt that Yun Chujo was really crazy when they heard her words. What was Tian Dao? Tian Dao was the ruler of all things in this world. No one, no matter what, could violate Tian Dao. If they were responsible, they would definitely be punished by the heavens. Yun Chujo actually asked what the Tian Dao was. Wasn't she crazy? Wan Pengcheng gritted his teeth. He originally wanted to report this to Elder Wan, but in order to avoid suspicion, he directly said to Elder Duanmu, Yun Chujo is either crazy or pretending to be crazy. She is deliberately trying to affect our comprehension of sword intent. Please help us make a decision. Elder Duanmu looked at Wan Pengcheng coldly and said, Shut up. She is having an epiphany. Epiphany? Everyone was stunned when Elder Duanmu said that. It was not rare to comprehend sword intent in the eye of sword intent. No one had heard of anyone who could have an epiphany here. If this epiphany was successful, Yun Chujo would really be lucky. However, this epiphany was not so easy to succeed. In the end, there might not be a reason for it. It was more important to continue comprehending sword intent. Thus, everyone no longer paid attention to Yun Chujo and continued comprehending the sword intent. As for Yun Chujo's mumbling from time to time, it did not affect the crowd at all. It was just Wan Pengcheng using the topic as an excuse. Cultivators were all determined people. Not to mention mumbling to themselves, even if they spoke loudly, there was actually no interference. A few strands of the drifters sneakily approached Yun Chujo. This little girl seemed to have been possessed. This was a good time for them to take advantage of the situation. However, a red light flashed on the large kitchen knife, and the drifters immediately disappeared in fright. Unfortunately, Yun Chujo was in a state of self-absorption and did not see what was happening. The small silver snake in her sleeve pocket could not see what was happening outside, so no one saw what was happening. Until night fell, Yun Chujo was still in a state of self-absorption. She did not mumble to herself anymore, but sat on the spot, meditating and cultivating. Everyone was certain that she didn't have an epiphany. They thought to themselves, I knew it. How could she be so lucky to have an epiphany in the eye of sword intent? It turned out that she was happy for nothing. Just as everyone was thinking about this, Yun Chuji's body flashed with light. Everyone stood up in surprise. This was a breakthrough. Everyone thought to themselves with jealousy. She really had an epiphany. It was really like a blind cat meeting a dead rat. However, her spiritual power was so low. Even if she broke through one level, she would only be at the 4th level of spiritual connection. However, almost in an instant, Yun Chuji's body shone brightly again. She actually broke through again. She broke through 2 levels in one go. Everyone, it's normal for her to break through 2 levels. After all, it was an epiphany. A moment later, the night sky was once again lit up by the brilliance that erupted from Yun Chuji's body. Everyone, 3 levels. After the epiphany, there was actually a 3-level rise. It was really nothing. After another moment, Yun Chuji's body once again shone with brilliance. Everyone, this is normal my ass. 1 epiphany and she broke through 4 levels. This is simply a freaking monster. Chapter 40-60 had reached the 9th level of spiritual connection. Although everyone was dumbfounded, they felt that the 4th level should be enough. However, Yun Chuji's body shone again. Everyone was numb. They only had one thought to comfort themselves. Fortunately, Yun Chujo was only at the third level of spiritual connection. Even if she tried her best to break through, she would not be able to break through to the next level. She was far from them. Therefore, when Yun Chujo shone for the sixth time, they were not surprised at all. They were really not surprised at all. Didn't she just gain an epiphany and advance to level 6? Didn't she just advance from level 3 of psychic power to level 9 of psychic power? What was so great about it? They were not jealous at all. It was as if they had drunk a jar of vinegar and felt a little sour. Finally, Yun Chuji's body no longer shone. In fact, Yun Chujo was not as exaggerated as upgrading to level 6. She was originally at level 5 of psychic power, but she had been hiding it with the hidden spirit ring. This time, she took advantage of the epiphany to adjust to her normal level in one go. Even so, Hei Xingjiu was very happy. If it were not for the fact that there was a big gap between psychic power and non-psychic power, she might have continued to break through. This epiphany was much more efficient than lightning strikes. In the future, it would be beneficial to think about it when she had nothing to do. Yun Chujo felt that it was almost time, so she opened her eyes. Then, she felt everyone's envious and jealous gazes. This fellow was extremely happy in his heart, but he pretended to be calm on the surface. However, his eyes were filled with a smile that made people gnash their teeth. Elder Duanmu was the first to speak. Yun Chujo, did you have an epiphany just now? What did you have an epiphany about? Elder Duanmu's words could be said to have expressed everyone's thoughts. All of them stretched their necks and looked eagerly at Yun Chujo. Yun Chujo said with a smile, "It's nothing much. I just thought of a saying in the secular world, man is like the earth is like the heaven is like the law of heaven is like the law of heaven, and heaven is like the law of nature. I just felt that this person should be unrestrained and let nature take its course." Then, he had an epiphany. Actually, I was just thinking about it casually. Who would have thought that I would have an epiphany? I broke through so many levels all of a sudden. It's very easy for my foundation to be unstable. I'm quite helpless about it. Everyone was so angry that they were twitching. What did she mean by taking advantage and pretending to be good? This fellow was indeed. It was really too infuriating. She was still worried about her foundation being unstable. They also really wanted to worry about her foundation being unstable, okay? But they didn't have the opportunity to do so. Elder Duanmu's expression froze, but he didn't say anything. Enlightenment was a personal opportunity, and one couldn't force it. One could only say that this little girl was very fortunate. He nodded slightly and said to the other disciples, "All right, everyone, continue to comprehend sword intent." Everyone was already in no mood to comprehend sword intent, so what was there to comprehend? Just a casual thought, and he had already broken through to the 6th level. Since that was the case, they could just think about it. Furthermore, they had already cultivated for 2 days and 1 night, so they were indeed a little tired. Thus, many of them retreated to the back of the group. Some ate while others slept. Wasn't that Yun Chujo already? Did she want to be unrestrained and let nature take its course? Then they would just eat when they were hungry and sleep when they were sleepy. Elder Duanmu shook his head and did not stop everyone. No matter if it was an epiphany or comprehension of sword intent, they could not force it. Such a huge commotion on the nameless sword sect's side naturally attracted the attention of the other sections. After hearing what had happened, they naturally sighed at Yun Chuji's good luck. Xiao Yu's expression was very ugly. That trash actually had an epiphany? No, she had to comprehend sword intent, and she had to comprehend 2 types of sword intent. When the time came, she would definitely teach that trash a lesson. Chapter 4061. Did you see the fog? Many people retreated to the back to eat, drink, and sleep. As a result, there were many empty seats in front. Everyone followed the rules and no one had any intention of taking those empty seats. However, Yun Chujo had never been a person who followed the rules. On one hand, she was thinking about the bones that Di Biming was looking for, on the other hand, she wanted to see where the drifters were hiding. Therefore, she eagerly walked to one of the empty seats for the core disciples in the front row. Although the disciples on the left and right were a little surprised to see her, no one said anything. Yun Chuzhou stretched her neck and looked forward. Although it was night time, she could still see vaguely under the moonlight. The giant sword was completely black. She didn't know what material it was made of, but there were some simple patterns on it. It looked very high-end and high-class. However, Yun Chuzhou was not very interested in the giant sword. Her eyes darted around as she looked at the ground below the giant sword. That place did not look any different from other places. As the giant sword was very big, the area below was not small either. If she were to flip it bit by bit, she did not know how long it would take to find the bones. Moreover, she did not have the chance to flip it. Yun Chuzhou began to search for the drifters again. Although the drifters were carefully hiding their tracks, Yun Chuzhou still saw a few strands of drifters floating out from the ground. Yun Chuzhou could not help but feel puzzled. Although these drifters were very faint, it was unreasonable that no one had discovered them. Could it be that they were all blind? In order to verify her guess, Yun Chuzhou whispered to a successive disciple beside her, "Senior brother, do you see the fog that is floating under the giant sword?" That disciple stared at it carefully for a while, then nodded. "There are indeed a few wisps of faint mist, but it's normal for there to be mist here." "Senior brother, don't you feel that it doesn't look like ordinary mist? Could it be something else?" Yun Chuzhou probed. That disciple was stunned at first, then looked at Yun Chuzhou with a sympathetic gaze. "Junior sister Yun, could it be that you're not feeling well because you've just had an epiphany?" The disciple was too embarrassed to say that Yun Chuzhou was mentally ill. Fog was fog, what else could it be? No wonder this Yun Chuzhou had an epiphany. It turned out that her brain was different from the average person's. Yun Chuzhou's face stiffened. She laughed and said a few words before continuing to pretend to comprehend sword intent. She had said it before. No one would believe her even if she told them about the drifters. No wonder they were so arrogant. Yun Chuzhou looked at the fog and the giant swords with a sad face. It was too difficult to abduct the drifters or dig out their bones. She wanted to let Xiao He dig underground, but under the watchful eyes of everyone, it was almost like suicide. While Yun Chuzhou was pondering, a mocking voice came from her side. "Yun Chuzhou, you should know your place. Why did an inner disciple like you run to the territory of a successor disciple? Go back to your own place." Yun Chuzhou raised her head and looked. The one who spoke was the disciple of Master Ouyang, Zhuang Hong, and Zhang Li's ungrateful junior brother. "Martial Uncle Zhuang, I didn't take your position in the first place. Aren't you being a little nosy? The second and second elders haven't spoken yet. Who do you think you are? Third, it's shameful to waste. I'm using resources efficiently. Finally, I've always walked, so I don't know how to scram. Why don't you scram a few times and let me see?" Chapter 4062, Let the Dog Be the Sect Leader. Zhuang Hong's expression immediately turned ugly. He was seated at the front of the core disciples and only realized that Yun Chuzhou had run to the front when he heard Yun Chuzhou talking to the disciple from before. Previously, Yun Chuzhou had gained 6 levels of enlightenment and he was already unhappy, so he came over to make use of the topic. However, he did not expect to be scolded by Yun Chuzhou until he almost vomited blood. The successor disciple who was talking to Yun Chuzhou just now secretly tugged at Yun Chuzhou's clothes and gave her a look. That meant that he did not want to go against Zhuang Hong. Zhuang Hong was the disciple of the sect master, and he might be the next sect master in the future. Going against him, wouldn't he be making things difficult for himself? Yun Chuzhou did not expect this disciple to be kind to her. However, she had never been afraid of anyone. She was not even afraid of Elder Wan, let alone Zhuang Hong. The next sect master. In her dreams. Even if this sect master let Dog be the sect master, he would not let Zhuang Hong be the sect master. But Face, who was in the spirit beast bag, immediately asked eagerly, little fairy, do you mean that you want me to be the next sect master of the nameless sword sect? Scram! Buttface curled his lips. She was the one who said that dog would be the sect master, and now her expression had changed. Women were indeed fickle. Zhuang Hong said with a livid expression, Yun Chujiu, I don't have time to argue with you. Quickly return to your seat. Yun Chujiu rolled her eyes and ignored him. She continued to stare at the huge sword in front of her in a daze. Zhuang Hong was about to flare up when Elder Duanmu said indifferently, Zhuang Hong, the seat is empty too. Let her go. Although Zhuang Hong thought highly of himself, he did not dare to go against Elder Duanmu. He could only agree and return to his seat. Elder Wan's hands tightened in his sleeves. That old thing Duanmu Mao was originally very displeased with Yun Chujiu, but now he actually took such good care of her. Yun Chujiu, on the other hand, felt that Elder Duanmu was great. Indeed, it was good to have a big tree as a shade. After this small episode, Yun Chujiu continued to stare at the huge sword and the floating drifter below her, worrying. Either she had a way to silently take away the bones, or she had a way to lure everyone away so that Xiao He could dig out the bones. However, either method was too difficult, and there was almost no chance of success. Just as He Xinjiu was thinking about it, the small silver snake in her sleeve pocket began to wriggle uneasily. Yun Chujiu was stunned at first, then she stood up and went to the back of the crowd. Zhuang Hong saw this scene and sneered. This stupid girl was just being stubborn. She would just leave obediently. Yun Chujiu walked to the back of the crowd, lowered her head and leaned closer to the sleeve pocket, saying in a low voice, What's wrong? I'm most likely going to transform. Quick, leave this place. A certain figure squeezed out a sentence from between his teeth. Yun Chujiu, she didn't provoke him, did she? Why was he going to transform? The pretty boy must have imagined something inappropriate for children. This pervert. However, even though he was complaining, he couldn't really let a certain someone run around in public. Not only was it embarrassing, but it was also hard to explain. Therefore, this guy held his stomach and said to Zhao Hui, who was not far away, Senior brother Zhao, my stomach is bad again. I have to go and take care of it. Zhao Hui, junior sister Yun, you are sick. You have to be treated. What else could he say? He could only watch Yun Chujiu run into the night, and from the looks of it, she seemed to be planning to run far away. However, it made sense. A girl would naturally run far away to hide her shame. Chapter 4063 was broken into pieces. Some of the disciples also heard the conversation between Yun Chujiu and Zhao Hui, but they did not take it to heart. Yun Chujiu ran all the way until she was sure that no one would see her. Then, she released the small silver snake, then, she pointed at him and said, Prince Charming, tell me, are you not pure again? I didn't expect you to be such a Prince Charming. The silver snake's body had already swelled up. Hearing Yun Chujiu's words, it swelled up even more. Yun Chujiu was even worried that it would explode. Nonsense. On one hand, it's because when you had an epiphany, it caused the surrounding spiritual energy to change. On the other hand, because the distance between you and the bone was shortened, that's why I'm like this, a certain venerable said dryly. His head was buzzing right now. When he thought about running for his life later, he felt that the entire snake was in trouble. However, a certain someone obviously had experience. He took out a large piece of black cloth and crawled inside. This way, even if he transformed, he would not run for his life. Beside him, Nine Pervert blinked his eyes. He actually thought that he could use a piece of black cloth to deprive her of the right to admire a handsome man. Tui. Dream on. This guy said in shock, Prince Charming, you'll ruin it if you hold on like this. Come, I'll help you hold on. Yun Chujiu said as she shamelessly crawled into the black cloth. Then, she met the silver snake's angry vertical pupils. This guy couldn't help but be a little cowardly. He smiled embarrassedly and said, since you don't feel bored, then you can stay inside by yourself. After this guy finished speaking, he quickly retreated from the cloth and scolded himself. Yun Chujo, oh, Yun Chujo, why are you so cowardly? This guy kicked the pebble under his feet in annoyance. If he had evil intentions but no guts, he was most likely talking about people like her. Sigh, it was all because of that damn Go Weiba. Otherwise, the pretty boy would have been her long ago, not to mention looking at him. Therefore, with the familiar formula and the familiar smell, Go Weiba was scolded again. This fellow scolded Go Weiba for a long time, but he did not see any movement in the cloth, so he asked, Prince Charming, are you changing or not? I'm waiting. After a long while, a certain someone said, maybe it's because I'm too far away from the bone, so, a certain someone did not continue. He felt that the face that he had painstakingly picked up before was now broken into pieces. Yun Chujo lifted the black cloth and squatted on the ground, glaring at the small silver snake. Prince Charming, are you joking with me? I'm a girl, and my stomach gets upset whenever I'm free. Do you think that's a good idea? What could a certain being say? He could only remain silent. He did not know whether he should be glad or annoyed that he did not run away. Hei Shinjo naturally knew that a certain being did not do it on purpose. After all, he had no choice when it came to transforming. Wait, something was not right. She narrowed her eyes, poked the silver snake's head with her hand, and said fiercely, Prince Charming, good, so you were lying to me. You said that you could recover your human body at any time, so you naturally could control the time of transformation, so how could you talk about the failure of transformation? Tell me, what exactly happened? You know my methods. If you don't tell me, I can only verify the description in the storybook. A certain man was so frustrated that he wanted to bang his head against the wall. In the end, he was discovered by this little scoundrel. He could even imagine that in the next period of time, he would have to live a life worse than death. Di Biming sighed. At first, I thought that the last transformation was because of the excessive sealing of the 7 emotions and 6 desires. But later, I realized that it was not because of this reason. Yun Chujo frowned, then what is the reason? Chapter 4064 You used to be a snake, right? It was caused by using a secret technique, Di Biming said in a low voice. A secret technique? The one where you absorbed 2 bones when you were chased by that bastard Lan Luochen at Chaotian sect? Yun Chujo asked in surprise. Di Biming was about to nod, but he realized that he was a snake and was being held by the little rascal. He had no choice but to say, that's right. Initially, I thought that after using the secret technique, my body would only be weak. I didn't expect that there would be such a problem. Yun Chujia's expression turned ugly when she recalled the incident where she was chased by Tower Master Luochen. She continued to ask, is there any way to solve it? I'm not sure yet, but one thing is for sure. These bones are extremely important to me. It's better to collect more. Yun Chujo nodded. Previously, the pretty boy had become very powerful after absorbing the power of the bones. If she could find more bones, it would definitely be very beneficial for the pretty boy to completely break the seal. However, she blinked her eyes and said, Prince Charming, I actually think that you were most likely a snake in the past. Otherwise, why would you turn into a snake instead of a pig? A certain someone, Di Biming took a deep breath and said, Little Jiu, this is the last time I will tell you. First, this is not a snake, but a dragon. Second, this is because my spiritual beast is an ice dragon, so this is not a snake. Not a snake. Hei Shinjo pursed her lips and refused to admit it. However, this guy was used to playing by the rules. When he saw that the silver snake was showing signs of turning into a black snake, he quickly changed the topic. Alright, I get it. You're not a snake, you're a human. You're a fair-skinned, beautiful, and long-legged person. Well, if I go back now, you won't transform again, right? The small silver snake's body stiffened. Fair-skinned, beautiful, and long-legged? Although every word was correct when taken apart, why was it so awkward when put together? He paused for a moment before saying, previously, it was because of the change in the spiritual energy from your epiphany and the superposition of the bones. Now, it should be fine only because of the bones. Hearing that, Yun Chujio immediately put the small silver snake back into her sleeve pocket and shamelessly put the black cloth into her storage ring. This fellow's intentions were clear as day. If she didn't have the black cloth, the next time she transformed, she would be able to openly admire it. Yun Chujio returned to the base and chose an empty seat at the front to sit down. She calmed her breath and focused on comprehending the sword intent. Unfortunately, those drifters came to cause trouble again. Yun Chujio had the intention to take out the lotus, but she was afraid that the drifters would make a buzzing sound again. Secondly, she hadn't seen any records about the lotus in the records of Atlas continent. If she took it out rashly, she might be in trouble. Therefore, Yun Chujio gritted her teeth and could only go to the back of the team and take out a tree branch to play with the drifters. At first, everyone thought that Yun Chujio was going to have an epiphany or comprehend sword intent again. They all stared at her, but they found that Yun Chujio's sword technique did not have any patterns, and there was no movement for a long time. They all curled their lips and no one paid any more attention to her. Soon, it was the 8th day of the opening of the Eye of Sword Intent. Many people had already comprehended sword intent. They even heard that Xiao Yu from the Flying Flower Island had already comprehended 2 types of sword intent. Joy filled the entire Eye of Sword Intent. Chapter 4065 The grandson of his grandson. However, amidst the joy, there was one person who was very miserable, even to the point of having nothing to live for. Hei Xinjiu had been quietly comprehending the sword intent for the past few days. Even when she slept and ate, it had to be the conscience of those damn drifters. Thus, everyone saw Yun Chujio waving the tree branch as if she was having a seizure every day. However, she did not comprehend the slightest bit of the sword intent. As a result, there were more and more jeers. Among them, Wan Pengcheng and Zhuang Hong were the most jeers. Yun Chujio, I advise you not to play around with your broken tree branch. Even if you die of exhaustion, it's impossible for you to comprehend sword intent with your current level of comprehension. Even though you have an epiphany, so what? Didn't your spiritual power not even reach the level of Lingwu? It's really a waste of the qualification to comprehend the Eye of Sword Intent. Wan Pengcheng had successfully comprehended a type of sword intent, and he could be said to be very proud now. Zhuang Hong snorted at the side and said, people like her are the most selfish. If it wasn't for her little tricks, how could Liao Tao and the others lose the qualification to comprehend the Eye of Sword Intent? Such a person is not worthy of comprehending the sword intent at all. Elder Duanmu watched coldly from the side and did not stop him. He only frowned. Wan Pengcheng was fine, but Zhuang Hong, as the sect leader's disciple, his bearing was too narrow. He was actually competing with a junior like this. Such a person did not have the qualifications to become the successor of the sect leader. However, Yun Chujio, that little girl, would not normally be bullied like this. Why was she so quiet recently? Elder Duanmu did not know that Hei Xinjiu wanted to be restless. However, those drifters had exhausted her. How could she have the strength to argue with Wan Pengcheng and the others? This fellow wished that she could grind the bones of the drifters into ashes. If not for the fact that the bones were still missing, she would have closed the Eye of Sword Intent earlier. It was too fucking torturous. Finally, the drifters gave Hei Xinjiu time to rest. Yun Chujio sat on the ground and panted heavily. Zhao Hui, Li Zhuangji, and the others came over with worried expressions. Junior sister Yun, are you alright? Anyway, you have already comprehended sword intent in the past, so don't force yourself. They all thought that Yun Chujio was in a hurry to comprehend sword intent, which was why she didn't practice the sword day and night. Hei Xinjia's heart was like a dog that was bickering, but she had no way to say it. She just smiled bitterly and said, isn't there a saying that diligence can make up for weakness? If I put in more effort, I'll definitely gain something. Zhao Hui and the others immediately felt ashamed. Looking at junior sister Yun's strong will, they felt ashamed of their inferiority. Thus, they did not try to persuade her anymore. Instead, they began to meditate and comprehend sword intent, learning from junior sister Yun, who had been cultivating diligently. The corner of Yun Chujia's eyes twitched. Looking at the huge sword in front of her, her heart was very anxious. There were only less than 2 days left, and she still could not think of a solution. Could it be that she had given up just like that? The day before, Di Baiming had said to Yun Chujio, "Little Jiu, if there is really no solution, then forget it. I will think of another solution in the future. Do not take any risks." However, the Eye of Sword Intent only appeared once every 100 years. If they missed it this time and the gigolo wanted to collect this bone, then they would have to wait for 100 years. At that time, their grandson's grandson would be able to join them. The strange grass in the dantian shook its leaves. It thought to itself, "You're thinking too much. As long as this Guai Chao was alive, not to mention his grandson's grandson, you wouldn't even have a son." Of course, He Xinjiu did not know what Guai Chao was thinking. Otherwise, she would definitely scold Guai Chao until he was so miserable that the world would fall apart. Chapter 4066, Ninth Day. Another day passed amidst Yun Chujia's melancholy. He Xinjiu was so worried that her head was about to explode. The group would be leaving tomorrow morning. She had not comprehended the sword intent, nor had she been able to abduct the killing aura, nor had she found a way to take away the bones. Could it be that she would have to return empty-handed this time? Fortunately, this fellow had never admitted defeat easily. She felt that there was nothing difficult in this world except for those who had a heart. There must be a way. It was just that she had not thought of it yet. Hence, when those drifters came to look for her again, this fellow directly held the relic in his hand and ignored those drifters. Those drifters were already used to playing with Yun Chujio. Now that Yun Chujio was ignoring them, they were naturally somewhat exasperated. Hence, the huge sword emitted a humming sound. Everyone subconsciously turned their heads to look at Yun Chujio, who was at the end of the group. They saw her sitting on the ground without any abnormal movements. However, Wan Pengcheng would not let go of such a good opportunity. He sneered and said, "Yun Chujio, are you here to cause trouble because you haven't comprehended the sword intent? You don't have to pretend anymore. You must have taken out something like Buddhist scriptures just now. You are really immoral." Yun Chujio was already very annoyed. When she heard Wan Pengcheng barking like a dog, her eyes burst with a fierce murderous intent. Wan Pengcheng was so frightened by Yun Chujia's sudden killing intent that he staggered and almost fell to the ground. When he looked again, he saw that Yun Chujio was no different from usual. He cursed in his heart. He must have seen wrongly just now. It was impossible for a good-for-nothing to have such a fierce gaze. Yun Chujio stood up and said to the crowd, "Although I didn't do anything, it's obvious that you won't believe me no matter what I say. In that case, I'll take the initiative to leave this place." After Yun Chujio finished speaking, she turned around and left the base. Elder Duanmu gaped and wanted to say something, but after thinking for a while, he didn't say anything. It was the last day anyway, and it seemed like she wouldn't be able to comprehend any sword intent. It was good that she left, at least she would be able to avoid causing trouble. Yun Chujio left the base with her head drooping. She felt that it was good to stay further away, at least she wouldn't have to be afraid of others. She could use the Buddha lotus to make those drifters stay further away, and she could also discuss it with Di Baiming. Hence, this fellow walked for a full 10 miles before he stopped. He then took out the small silver snake from his sleeve pocket. "Little Jiu, let's forget about the matter of the bones. It should be because the opportunity has yet to come. I will come and get it when I have the chance in the future," Di Baiming said. These few days, he could only watch as Yun Chujio was tormented by the drifters. His heart was filled with hatred and heartache. Naturally, he did not want Yun Chujio to be upset over the matter of the bones. Yun Chujio said fiercely, "Prince Charming, even if we don't take the bones, I have to think of a way to deal with those drifters. They are simply going too far. I must think of a way to bring them back to the sect." When the time comes, I will slowly think of a way to deal with them. I want them to regret it for the rest of their lives. Di Biming did not stop her. He could completely understand Yun Chujia's hatred towards those drifters. Other than Guai Chao, the little rascal probably hated these drifters the most. While Yun Chujio was talking to Di Biming, the drifters floated over happily. It was obvious that they wanted Yun Chujio to play with them. Chapter 4067, Hold Their Vital Points. Yun Chujio looked at the excited look of the drifters and gritted her teeth. She took out a few lotus flowers and waved them at them. Although the drifters had retreated some distance, they did not leave immediately. It was obvious that they were no longer afraid of the lotus flowers. Yun Chujio cursed in her heart. Damn it, these drifters were simply perverts. Not only could she not shake them off, but they were also becoming more and more daring. Just like those drifters in her courtyard, they initially saw the relics running in all directions, but later on, they did not take it seriously at all. Thinking of those drifters in the courtyard, Yun Chujia's heart suddenly moved. When she went to the Blood Sand Island, those sword pool drifters knew that she was going to leave and did not want to separate from her. They took the initiative to enter the puppet disc. Then, could these native drifters be like the sword pool drifters? Yun Chujio thought of this and sighed faintly. Sigh, little babies, although I have been using Sarairas and Buddhist lotuses to expel you, it is only because I am too tired. From the bottom of my heart, I really enjoy playing with you. Unfortunately, I will leave this place tomorrow. If we want to meet, we will have to wait until 100 years later. Moreover, I may not have the qualifications to come at that time, so, we can only meet again in the future. Those drifters were originally floating around happily, but after hearing Yun Chujia's words, they suddenly stopped. Yun Chujio saw that there was a door, so she continued, you guys don't have to be sad. After all, we've only met by chance. You guys will definitely find someone else to play with you guys. Just forget about me. When this fellow said this, he even shed a few crocodile tears. The small silver snake coiled around her arm stiffened. It had to be said that the little rascal's ability to lie through his teeth was getting better and better. When the drifters saw this, they began to fly up and down anxiously, looking rather annoyed. Yun Chujio thought to herself, although she did not know why these drifters were pestering her, it was clear that they were reluctant to part with her. As long as she firmly grasped this point, she would definitely be able to control these drifters. Yun Chujio sobbed and said a few more reluctant words. Every time she spoke, a few drops of crocodile tears would fall. It was so sad that it would make anyone who heard it cry. The atmosphere was more or less hyped up. This fellow seemed to have said intentionally or unintentionally, "Sigh, the main thing is that you guys are different from the drifters that I brought. They can enter the puppet disc with my spiritual sense. I'm afraid that you guys can't, right?" The drifters immediately rushed in front of Yun Chujio anxiously. The meaning was self-evident. They could do that too. They really could do that. A faint light flashed across Yun Chujia's lowered eyes. In her heart, she cursed herself for being so stupid. She was clearly holding onto these drifters' vital points, yet she was foolishly fooled for so many days. Fortunately, it was not too late to wake up now. Not only did she want to abduct these drifters, but she also wanted them to help her retrieve the bones. Yun Chujio had a few thoughts in her mind, and then she said in surprise, "You guys can do it too, right? Is it true?" When the drifters saw that Yun Chujio finally understood what they meant, they immediately jumped up happily. Yun Chujio also laughed a few times happily, but then she frowned and said, "Although you guys can do it too, but I don't have any more puppet discs, right?" The drifters immediately became anxious again. Just as they were feeling disappointed, they heard Yun Chujio sigh and said, "Actually, it's not that there's no other way. It's just that I lack one thing. If you guys can help me get it, I can make a few more puppet discs." Chapter 4068, Bones in Hand. As soon as Yun Chujio finished her sentence, the drifters anxiously moved closer to Yun Chujio. Did she mean that she wanted something? Yun Chujio sighed. Forget it. That thing is too difficult to obtain. Just pretend that I didn't say anything. Give it up. A certain person said that this little scoundrel was really mean. The more she said that, the more curious the drifters would be. Sure enough, the drifters gathered together and jumped around. They were obviously so anxious that they were about to hit the wall. Until they were so anxious that they didn't want anything else, Yun Chujo then said, "What I want is a small piece of bone buried under the giant sword. However, I don't think this thing is easy to find. Moreover, it's under the giant sword. If you guys are in trouble," before Yun Chujo could finish her words, the drifters could not wait to float away. Yun Chujo confirmed that the drifters had all flown away. Then, she said to Di Baiming, "Prince Charming, how is it? I told you that I would definitely think of a way to deal with those drifters. This is called killing two birds with one stone. Since I kidnapped these drifters and obtained the bones effortlessly, I am really too smart." Ha ha ha. Although Di Baiming really wanted to praise Yun Chujo, he felt that it was better to forget about it. He did not need to praise this fellow as he had already praised himself like a flower. If he continued to praise her, she would float to the sky. Yun Chujo bragged for a while. When she saw that Di Baiming did not say anything, she could not help but feel a little disappointed. She poked the head of the little silver snake with her claws. "Little baby, why aren't you saying anything? Do you think you have such good taste? Are you loving me more and more?" Because there was a glimmer of hope in this matter, this fellow had the mood to tease a certain lord. Of course, the most important point was that this fellow knew that Di Baiming wouldn't be able to transform for a while, so he had nothing to fear. Di Baiming had obviously thought of this as well. He was too lazy to resist, because countless blood and tears had taught him that it was useless to resist at this time. He did not continue Yun Chujo's words. Instead, he asked, "In a while, if those drifters really bring the bones over, do you really want to make a puppet disc? There are already 5 puppet discs, can your divine sense still separate them?" Yun Chujo revealed a sinister smile, "Of course not. Don't worry, I have a good way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone." Di Baiming saw the sinister smile on Yun Chujo's face and could not help but light a candle for those drifters. The outcome of those drifters torturing the little rascals was as miserable as it was. No, it was probably 10,000 times more miserable. However, after waiting for a long time, those drifters did not return. Yun Chujo could not help but feel anxious. Di Baiming comforted her. "Don't worry. It's probably because the sky is still dark. After all, they want to hide from people. It's impossible for them to brazenly take out the bones." Yun Chujo thought about it and agreed, so she temporarily put this matter aside and began to calm down and focus on comprehending the sword intent. In the end, this fellow was still a little unwilling. Others had already comprehended the sword intent, so why couldn't she comprehend it? Seeing this, Di Baiming didn't say anything else, but helped her to be on guard. As night fell, Yun Chujo became anxious again, so she couldn't continue comprehending, so this fellow gave up. She flirted with a certain someone and finally saw the drifters return. The drifters threw Yun Chujo a thumb-sized bone. Yun Chujo took it and looked at it. It was almost the same as the one she had seen in the fallen god abyss. Chapter 4069, The drifters who got played. Yun Chujo asked Di Baiming to confirm it again. Then, she asked Di Baiming to put away the bones. Then, she looked at the drifters with a smile. "Little babies, you are so capable. I will make the puppet plates now. I will release the sword pool drifters. You guys can play for a while." Yun Chujo took out the 3 puppet plates and released the sword pool drifters as well. When the 2 drifters saw each other, they immediately jumped around happily and did not disturb Yun Chujo from making the puppet discs. 2 hours later, Yun Chujo made a few puppet discs in a decent manner, but she did not inject her spiritual sense into them. She sighed faintly and said, "Little babies, perhaps I've been too tired playing with you recently. I can't separate my spiritual sense from you. I'm really sorry." Those native drifters were instantly enraged. What? Wasn't this playing with them? Before the drifters could make a move, Yun Chujo continued, although I'm really sorry to you, this is all for another time. The crux of the problem now is how to bring you to my side. I really can't bear to part with you. Those native drifters were fuming. What was the use of saying such nonsense? Yun Chujo blinked her eyes. Actually, it's not that there's no other way. Aren't there 3 ready-made puppet discs here? Since you're all drifters, then there shouldn't be any distinction between you and me. Just squeeze in. Hearing Yun Chujia's words, the sword pool drifters immediately guarded the 3 puppet discs vigilantly. What a joke. It was fine to play together, but to snatch their toys? No way. There were no windows. Yun Chujo pretended to persuade them, sword pool drifters, don't be so stingy. As the saying goes, all the drifters in the world are family. You are all drifters, just squeeze together. How could the sword pool drifters listen to her? They immediately guarded the puppet discs even tighter. Yun Chujo spread her hands helplessly, since you won't give in to each other, let's have a competition. Whoever wins, the puppet discs will belong to them. The sword pool drifter was about to explode in anger. These puppet discs were originally theirs. Why should they give it to these indigenous drifters? Those indigenous drifters were also extremely angry. The little girl had already agreed to let them enter the puppet disc, so why didn't these sword pool drifters agree? Therefore, the 2 groups of drifters pinched each other and kept rolling in the air. Hei Shinjo narrowed her eyes as she watched, her heart filled with joy. This was called sowing discord. This was called sowing discord. This was called killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Let's fight, let's fight. If we kill one, we lose one. It would be best if we all die. Unfortunately, these drifters did not disappear so easily. After fighting for 2 hours, there was still no winner between the 2 sides. Yun Chujo felt that it was not a good idea to continue like this. Moreover, if someone came, it would not end well, hence, she said hypocritically, all right. We are originally from the same root, why are you in such a rush? You are all drifters, so don't kill each other. A certain respected person said, this is all your fault, all right? Now, she was trying to act nice. However, she had to admit that she had used this tactic to sow discord. This way, even if she returned to the nameless sword sect, the little rascal could still let the 2 groups of drifters pin each other down. Those drifters were probably tired from fighting. After hearing Yun Chujia's words, they stopped fighting. Yun Chujo said with a smile, how about this? Harmony is the most important thing in everything. Aren't there 3 puppet discs here? The drifters from the sword pool came first, so they were given 2 puppet discs. You indigenous drifters can squeeze in the other puppet disc first. When I regain my spiritual sense, it'll help you make a few puppet discs. Chapter 40-70 Destruction of the Giant Sword. Although the drifter from the sword pool and the native drifter were very unwilling, it was obvious that they had no other choice. They could only follow Yun Chujia's instructions and enter the puppet disc. Actually, even if they were all squeezed into the same puppet disc, it wasn't impossible. However, these drifters liked the trace of Yun Chujia's divine sense in the puppet disc, so they naturally weren't willing to share more with the drifters. When Yun Chujo saw that the drifters had all entered the puppet plate, she quickly put them into her storage ring and laughed, finally, it has stopped. The world is finally quiet. Ha ha ha. This fellow had fully demonstrated what it meant to be arrogant when one was pleased with oneself. He was so cocky that he wished he could vent all the frustrations he had for the past few days. Just as this fellow was being cocky, he felt the ground tremble violently. Then, he heard a faint noise coming from afar. Yun Chujo was stunned. What happened? Because the sky was completely dark and the distance was very far, Yun Chujo couldn't see anything even if she stretched her neck. This fellow felt that it was better to go over and take a look. Hence, he put the small silver snake into his sleeve pocket and went to the encampment. At this moment, not only was the encampment of the Nameless Sword sect in chaos, the encampment of the other 5 great sects was also in chaos. In the middle of it was the terrified cries of the crowd. How did the giant sword suddenly turn into dust? What's going on? Yeah, it turned into dust right in front of our eyes. How did this happen? Did the giant sword just disappear like that? Is there no more Eye of Sword intent in the future? Only then did Yun Chujio realize that the giant sword that was originally standing there had disappeared without a trace. There was only a huge pit left on the ground, and there was a thick layer of dust on the ground. This guy had an inexplicable sense of guilt. This should, probably, 80% have nothing to do with her keeping the drifters, right? This guy had done his own ideological work for her, so it definitely didn't matter. The drifter was the drifter, and the huge sword was the huge sword. How could they be mixed together? Or maybe it had something to do with the bone that the gigolo wanted. That shouldn't be either. It was just a small piece of bone, how could it be a huge sword? Moreover, the drifter had taken the bone away for some time, and this huge sword had turned into powder after. It must have nothing to do with the bone, right? Although this guy felt a little guilty, his expression was the same as everyone else's. He was shocked and terrified at the same time. His acting skills were simply amazing. At this moment, Wan Pengcheng shouted sharply, "This must have something to do with Yun Chujio." If she hadn't taken out the Buddhist scriptures, the giant sword wouldn't have made a buzzing sound. The buzzing sound must have been caused by something unexpected happening to the giant sword, which was why it turned into dust in the end. Wan Pengcheng's words instantly made Yun Chujio become the focus of everyone's attention. Everyone looked at her. If ordinary people were surrounded by such a formation, they might have already been scared silly. However, Yun Chujio laughed coldly. "Wan Pengcheng, you've been targeting me repeatedly previously. For the sake of the overall situation, I didn't argue with you. I've even been expelled a few times. I didn't say anything. However, now that you've thrown such a big blame on me, I have no choice but to say a few words. You said that it was because I took out the Buddhist scriptures that the huge sword turned into dust. Then let me ask you, if the huge sword had already experienced some changes, why was everyone able to comprehend the sword intent normally? Moreover, when the huge sword turned into dust, I wasn't here at all. If you want to add to the crime, why don't you say anything?" Chapter 4071, Someone would exonerate her. Wan Pengcheng was about to defend himself when Yun Chujio raised her voice and continued, "Also, why is the giant sword afraid of the Buddhist scriptures? Everyone knows that the Buddhist scriptures restrain evil things. Could it be that the giant sword is an evil thing? Besides, how could an ordinary Buddhist scripture turn a giant sword into dust? Don't you think what you said is ridiculous? According to what you said, the Buddhist scripture has such great power. In the future, there's no need to fight against the enemy. Just take out the Buddhist scripture and recite it. Even if you and I usually have a feud, you shouldn't mislead people and draw their attention to me. You've drawn things to me again and again. Could it be that you have a guilty conscience? Could it be that the destruction of this huge sword has something to do with you?" Wan Pengcheng instantly exploded. You're bullshit. How could I have such a great ability to destroy the huge sword? It was caused by a jinx like you. Ever since you came to our Nameless Sword sect, there have been many changes in the sword pool. You're the nemesis of the sword, so this huge sword was destroyed by you." Yun Chujio's expression was even more mocking. "If I really had that ability, I would be the first to kill you. It's all nonsense. I don't want to say any more. I believe that everyone has their own judgment. The Buddhist scriptures destroying the huge sword is simply a joke. Instead of wasting time here, why don't we leave this place quickly? If the huge sword is destroyed and we can't get out, that would be bad." The crowd didn't believe that it was because of the Buddhist scriptures. It was too far-fetched. Besides, the huge sword had existed for an unknown amount of time. Perhaps it was because it had existed for too long that it had turned into dust. The humming sound from before should be the precursor. It was just that Wan Pengcheng had blamed it on Yun Chuzhou, so the crowd didn't pay attention to it. Most importantly, everyone felt that Yun Chuzhou was right. Now that the huge sword had been destroyed, they did not know if it would affect the opening of the enchantment tomorrow. It was better to hurry to the exit of the enchantment. Anyway, Yun Chuzhou could not escape. It was not too late to interrogate her after she got out. Therefore, the 6 sects decided that it was more important to retreat quickly. Everyone began to retreat in a hurry. Their hearts were shrouded in a layer of shadow. It was better not to have any unforeseen circumstances. If they were really trapped here, it would be terrible. However, it was fortunate that the enchantment opened on time the next day. Everyone could not wait to use the Eye of Sword intent. After everyone came out, they heard a huge explosion. The enchantment began to tremble violently, and the Eye of Sword intent disappeared in front of everyone. Although everyone did not see it with their own eyes, from the sound, the Eye of Sword intent must have collapsed. There would be no more so-called Eye of Sword intent in the future. At this moment, Xiaoyu from the Flying Flower Island sneered and said, "Now that we have come out from the Eye of Sword intent, shouldn't we deal with Yun Chuzhou?" Everyone's attention fell on Yun Chuzhou again. Yun Chuzhou's expression was very calm because she knew that someone would excuse her. Sure enough, Elder Wan said with a gloomy expression, "Everyone, Yun Chuzhou has already made it very clear. How can a little girl like her destroy a huge sword? Furthermore, she was banished 10 miles away at that time and did not have the chance to make a move. Therefore, this matter has nothing to do with her." Peng Cheng, this child, framed a disciple of the same sect because of a small personal grudge. This old man will definitely discipline him severely when I return. As for the reason why the huge sword was destroyed, we still have to think long and hard. Most likely, it was because of the passage of time that such a change occurred. Chapter 4072, Elder Wan's help in exonerating her. The other sects were fine, but the Nameless Sword sect members all looked at Elder Wan in surprise. Who didn't know that Elder Wan hated Yun Chuzhou to the core? Why would he speak up for her? Wan Pengcheng was even more dumbfounded. Had his grandfather gone senile? He was about to speak, but he was so frightened by Elder Wan's fierce gaze that he didn't dare to make a sound. Although Elder Duanmu did not understand, he still echoed, "Elder Wan is right. This is just a small grudge between 2 disciples of our sect." Yun Chuzhou was a little girl who was at the 9th layer of spiritual perception. Even if she had the intention to do so, she did not have the ability to do so, much less not have the intention to do so. Everyone here is sensible and experienced. Naturally, they can determine whether this matter is true or false. This matter was started by my Nameless Sword sect, so I apologize to all of you. Elder Duanmu said and was about to bow when an elder from Xuanji sect, who was the closest to him, hurriedly held him up. He smiled and said, "Elder Duanmu, you're being too serious. It's just the noise of a child. We're not 3-year-old children, so how could we really believe such nonsense?" Yun Chuzhou felt a little sour when she saw Elder Duanmu's reaction. Although this old man Duanmu did not treat her well at the beginning, he had spoken up for her many times this time. In the future, she would definitely find an opportunity to mend the broken 1,000-cleaver sword. It could be considered as a form of repayment to him. As for why Elder Wan spoke up for Yun Chuzhou, it was because Yun Chuzhou found an opportunity on the way out. She said to him alone, "Elder Wan, it's best that you clean up the aftermath of your grandson's stupid actions. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences." Elder Wan was furious. Was this Yun Chuzhou mentally ill? What right did she have to threaten him? Moreover, what Wan Pengcheng had done was very in line with his intentions. It would be best if he could get rid of Yun Chuzhou this time. Yun Chuzhou naturally saw through Elder Wan's thoughts. She sneered and said, "Do you think it's great to get rid of me with this matter? Humph, it's really stupid. The crowd might not really convict me. After all, I didn't do this in the first place. A few Buddhist scriptures destroyed the huge sword. It would make people laugh their heads off. When Elder Wan heard Yun Chujia's words, a cold smile appeared on his face. It was obvious that he did not think much of it. Yun Chujio continued, to take a step back, everyone really believed Wan Pengcheng's words. They felt that the huge sword was destroyed by me. How do you think they will deal with me? Kill me? No, what they will be most interested in is how I destroyed the huge sword and why. When the time comes, I will say that this was the will of the nameless ancestor. I obtained the Buddhist scriptures from the nameless ancestor's cave abode. What do you think will happen when the time comes? When the time comes, the nameless sword sect will become the target of public criticism. And all of this is because of that brainless fool, Wan Pengcheng. Even if I don't have a good ending, you will never be able to sit on the position of the nameless sword sect's sect master. Moreover, even if everyone didn't use their brains to condemn me, I might not necessarily die. After all, I was using the name of the nameless patriarch. If you guys didn't protect my little life, that would be disobeying the nameless patriarch's orders. Do you think that others won't believe my words? TSK, they will believe it. After all, how could a little trash like me destroy the giant sword? Moreover, they will also attribute my previous epiphany to the nameless patriarch. So, you only have one choice now, and that is to clean up the aftermath for that stupid grandson of yours. Elder Wan's originally cold smile became very cold. He had to admit that Yun Chujia's analysis was correct. Everyone might not really convict her. Moreover, if she pushed the blame onto the nameless patriarch, the development of the matter would really be as she had predicted. His situation in the nameless sword sect would become more delicate. Therefore, despite Elder Wan's reluctance, after weighing the pros and cons, he still stepped forward to exonerate Yun Chujio. Chapter 4073. One mountain cannot accommodate two tigers. As Elder Wan and Elder Duanmu had attributed the matter to the personal grudges of their disciples, coupled with the fact that the destruction of the huge sword from the Buddhist scriptures was indeed a little far-fetched, everyone decided to put the matter behind them. Xiao Yu originally thought that Yun Chujio would be in big trouble this time, but she did not expect that nothing would happen in the end. Although she was very unwilling, the elders of the 6 great factions had already expressed their stance. If she still insisted, that would be asking for trouble. However, it was fortunate that she had comprehended 2 sword intents this time, and it was said that although Yun Chujio had an epiphany, she had not even comprehended a single sword intent. Sooner or later, she would be taught a lesson. Everyone sighed with emotion. Looking at it from another angle, they were also lucky. After all, no one would be able to enter the eye of sword intent from now on. Everyone exchanged a few more pleasantries before returning to their respective areas. As soon as they boarded the flying spirit tool, Wan Pengcheng was called away by Elder Wan. When he returned, his expression was very unsightly. He said to Yun Chujio viciously, "Consider yourself lucky this time." "Well, just wait and see." Yun Chujio smiled faintly and said, "We'll be waiting for you at any time." Wan Pengcheng felt even more stifled when he saw Yun Chujio like this. He wished that he could strangle Yun Chujio to death on the spot. However, when he thought of Elder Wan's words, he could only return to his seat angrily. His scoundrel friends shouted, "Senior brother Wan, you don't have to lower yourself to her level. This time, Liao Tao and the others have suffered a great loss. The next inner sect competition will be held in a few days. When that time comes, there will be a good show to watch." That's right. This time, they won't do any battle team challenge. They will only do one-on-one challenges. When that time comes, Yun Chujio and the others will definitely be beaten up badly. That's right. If I were from Team Sun, I would also try my best to teach them a lesson. Moreover, some people wasted this opportunity for nothing. They actually didn't even comprehend a single sword intent. What a loss. The voices of those few people were very loud. It was obvious that they were intentionally listening to Yun Chujio and the others. Yun Chujio's expression was normal, but the faces of Zhao Hui and the others were a little pale. The 6 of them were not bad. They had all comprehended the sword intent, but even so, they were not a match for Liao Tao and the others. At that time, they might really have to be beaten up. Yun Chujiu glanced at them and said in a low voice, "What are you afraid of? When the time comes, you can just admit defeat." The 6 of them thought for a moment. That's right. Since their goal had been achieved, there was no point in getting a ranking within the top 100. They could just go up on the stage and admit defeat. The 6 of them suddenly had an epiphany and threw this matter to the back of their minds. On this day, the flying spirit tool arrived at the Nameless Sword sect. Elder Duanmu and Elder Wan went to report the situation to Master Ouyang, while the others went back to their residences. After Yun Chujiu returned to her own courtyard, she washed up and then coiled the small silver snake on her arm and went into the courtyard, ready to play with those drifters. Yun Chujiu took out the puppet disc and released both types of drifters. Then, she looked at them with a smile. The native drifters had never left the eye of sword intent before. When they saw the things in the courtyard, they were very curious. Especially when they saw the 2 swings, they immediately flew over impatiently. When the sword pool drifters saw this, they were instantly unhappy. It was one thing to snatch their puppet discs, but now, they actually wanted to take over their swings. They were courting death. Thus, the 2 types of drifters started fighting again. Hei Xinjiu, who was watching the show while nibbling on the spirit fruit, was elated. This was exactly what she had expected. As the saying went, there was no room for 2 tigers on one mountain. These 2 types of drifters would have to fight in the future. Chapter 4074 You were a snake. To begin with, the battle between the 2 types of drifters was extremely intense. Even after the sun had set, there was still no victor. The drifters from the sword pool had not returned to the sword pool for many days. In the end, they flew away in a huff and forgot to bring the puppet discs with them. Those native drifters did not understand and followed curiously. Yun Chujiu slowly put the 3 puppet discs into her storage ring. The days ahead would definitely be very interesting. This fellow yawned and said to the little silver snake, "Little baby, it's time for the lullaby." Although a certain pitiful being was extremely unwilling, he could only sing the lullaby to coax the little rascal to sleep. Yun Chujiu had been very tired these few days, so she fell asleep before the certain being could finish singing the lullaby. The certain being looked at her sweet sleeping face with doting eyes. After looking at it for a while, he finally took out the bone that he had obtained previously. The small silver snake's vertical pupils were slightly confused. He did not know the origin of these bones, but he vaguely knew that these bones were very important to him. Moreover, there was naturally a method to use the secret technique in his mind. He had carefully studied the 3 bones that he had obtained. They were only the size of a thumb. They seemed to be human bones, but they did not seem to be human bones. What kind of bones were these? Who was he in the past? As the layers of seals were removed, his original understanding was overturned again and again. He originally thought that he was only the saint of the Dark Continent, but he was not. Who was he? The more he thought about it, the more clueless he became. Di Baiming could not help but fall into a state of obsession. The surrounding spiritual energy began to distort, but Di Baiming did not notice it at all. Suddenly, a dazzling light flashed, and Yun Chujiu opened her eyes in shock. When this guy saw the beautiful scene in front of him, he almost drooled. Di Baiming had also recovered from his obsession at this time. He felt a chill on his body. He looked down, and there was only one thought in his mind: I have run away again. Hei Xinjiu quickly covered her eyes with her claws, but the gap between her fingers was enough for this guy to peek openly. After a moment of blankness, Di Baiming pulled the quilt that was originally covering Yun Chujiu to cover his body. Hei Xinjiu, who was covering her claws to peek, was annoyed. She hadn't even seen it clearly, but it was covered. What a pity. However, this guy was afraid that Di Baiming would settle the score later, so he said without thinking twice, "Prince Charming, I'm covering my eyes." "I didn't see anything." Di Biming was both embarrassed and angry. He snorted and thought to himself, who the hell would believe you? After he put on his clothes, he threw the quilt on Yun Chujo again. For a moment, the atmosphere in the room was very awkward. Of course, only a certain someone was embarrassed. Hei Xinjiu was a little nervous. She was thinking about what to say. It was best if she could make a certain someone forget her crime. This fellow said dryly, "Prince Charming, why did you suddenly become a human?" Di Biming briefly recounted what had happened just now. His heart skipped a beat. It seemed that with this bone by his side, as long as the surrounding spiritual energy changed drastically, he would be able to return to his original form. Yun Chujo also thought of this point. While she was happy for Di Biming, she was also a little disappointed. The days where she could bully the pretty boy as she pleased were gone forever. If she had known earlier, she should have bullied him earlier. In order to change the topic, he said, "Prince Charming, you said that you don't know the origin of these bones. I think these bones might be snake bones because you are a snake." Chapter 4075, Hei Xinjiu, who was embarrassed and angry. Yun Chujo also finished her sentence and realized that her scalp was a little numb. It seemed that the gigolo had warned her that she was not a snake. This guy cursed in his heart. She had already become a snake several times, yet she still refused to admit it. Men were indeed psychopaths who did not mean what they said. As expected, Di Biming said coldly, "Little Jiu, I told you that I am not a snake. Have you forgotten?" Hei Xinjiu laughed dryly, I haven't forgotten. I was just joking. How can a handsome man like you be a snake?" Seeing that Di Biming's expression was still cold, she quickly continued, "Prince Charming, don't be angry. If you feel that it's not balanced, then it'll be a snake. It'll be a beautiful snake, it'll be a little snake spirit." Hei Xinjiu's words suddenly stopped, because this guy was knocked on the bed. Just as the two of them were having an intimate moment, a certain someone's body stiffened. He suddenly raised his head and saw strands of drifters floating in the room, watching them calmly. Di Biming's body was instantly filled with a biting cold aura, and those drifters walked away eagerly. After being disturbed by the drifters, the romance between the two immediately turned into anger. Hei Xinjiu rushed out barefooted with a few lotus flowers in her hands. Damn it, if she didn't deal with these drifters today, her name wouldn't be Yun Chujo. Di Biming sighed silently. He walked out of the house and picked up Hei Xinjiu, who was barefooted. Hei Xinjiu waved the lotus flowers and said through gritted teeth, "Idol, put me down. I must fight to the death with them today. They actually peeked at us making out. They are openly declaring war on me." The reason why Hei Xinjiu was so angry was mostly because she was embarrassed. Although she was thick-skinned, it was still embarrassing to be seen as a monkey by those drifters, okay? Di Biming saw Yun Chuji's angry look and laughed lightly. He carried her into the house and gently put her on the bed. Then, he patted her little head and said, "Why bother with them? It's getting late. Go to sleep." When Yun Chujo heard Di Biming's words, she remembered that she had been kissed until she was dizzy. She immediately hid under the blanket. She was too ashamed to face anyone. It was rare for Di Biming to see Yun Chujo so shy. He did not continue to tease her. Instead, he used his hand to pat her gently. Hei Xinjiu fell asleep in a daze. When she fell asleep, Di Biming's eyes flashed with a cold light. He got off the bed and went into the courtyard. The drifters were jumping around in the courtyard. When they saw Di Biming coming out, they trembled and moved to the top of the swing. They didn't differentiate between the sword pool drifters and the native drifters. It was more important for them to huddle together to stay warm. They didn't want to be so cowardly. When this man was a small snake, he was just a piece of trash. How did he become a human and become so scared? Di Biming glanced at these drifters and slowly said, "No matter what your motive is for getting close to little Jill, if you dare to hurt her, even if you don't die or die, I will make you wish you were dead." Those drifters gathered into two blurry human figures and kept nodding. They were almost kneeling on the ground to show their submission. Seeing this, Di Biming turned around and returned to the house. He let go of his right hand. There was a thumb-sized bone in his palm. He had borrowed a portion of the bone's power to intimidate the drifters. Chapter 4076 Only envied Mandarin ducks and not immortals. While Di Biming was deep in thought, he heard Yun Chuzhou mumble in her sleep, "Little baby, come, give me a kiss." A certain someone, he laughed bitterly and put the bone into his storage ring. Then, he closed his clothes and lay down. Yun Chuzhou consciously leaned over and nestled her little head in his embrace. Di Biming kissed her forehead. Even though the future was dangerous, he believed that the day would come when the clouds would rise and the sun would rise. The next day, He Xinjiu opened her eyes and saw Di Biming lying beside her. He was determined to take advantage of her, and then, the bed knocked on him again. The two of them lingered for a while before they got up to wash up. He Xinjiu thought about what happened last night and gritted her teeth in hatred. When she pushed the door open, she found that the two groups of drifters were each occupying a swing. They seemed very obedient. Obedient? Could these things be associated with being obedient? Yun Chuzhou glared at the drifters fiercely before turning around and returning to the house. During breakfast, Yun Chuzhou hesitated for a moment before asking, "Idol, you've recovered your original form. Are you going to leave soon?" Di Biming originally wanted to leave after breakfast, but when he saw Yun Chuzhiu's reluctant expression, he said against his will, "I have nothing to do for the time being. I'll accompany you for a few days before leaving." Hearing that, Yun Chuzhou immediately beamed with joy. Then, she ate 2 more meat buns. As long as she wasn't in a good mood and didn't have an appetite, it was fine. Because of the handsome man's company, Yun Chuzhou didn't leave the courtyard for a few days in a row. During that time, Zhao Hui and Li Zhuangji sent messages to urge her to go to class, but this guy rejected them on the grounds that he was sick. What bullshit swordsmanship class? Sword formation class? He didn't go to any of them. He could punish them however he wanted. Nothing was more important than having fair skin and beautiful long legs. This guy was in a good mood, and he liked those drifters a lot. Occasionally, he would play with them for a while Di Biming stood at the side and watched with a smile. When Dog 2, who was holding mushrooms in the corner, saw this scene, it felt sour in its heart. So this was the legendary envy of lovers, not immortals. When would it be able to find its little baby? On this day, Di Biming and Yun Chuzhou were playing chess in the courtyard. Of course, He Xinjiu had done many things like stealing chess pieces, so a certain deity pretended not to see it. At this moment, Di Biming's voice transmission talisman started to tremble. Di Biming frowned after he sent his divine sense in. "Prince Charming, what's wrong? Who sent it to you?" He Xinjiu asked while secretly changing the position of a chess piece. Di Biming did not expose her and said indifferently, "It's from Shui Wuji. It's nothing. Let's continue." Seeing this, Yun Chuzhou did not take it seriously. However, after a while, her voice transmission talisman began to vibrate. Shui Wuji's hopeless voice came from it, "Little sister Zhou, has that facial paralysis recovered? If it has, hurry up and ask him to come back. The little madman and I will be chased until we become homeless dogs." Yun Chuzhou was stunned. She recalled that Di Biming had been absent-minded for the past few days, and her heart was sour and sweet. She suddenly understood that it was not that Di Biming had nothing to do, but he had deliberately stayed behind to accompany her. Shui Wuji and Enfeng must have been hunted down until they had no choice. Otherwise, they would not have run back to Towering Sky Continent. When Di Biming saw Yun Chuzhiu's expression, he knew that it was Shui Wuji who sent her a voice transmission talisman. He immediately said indifferently, "Shui Wuji, that idiot, always exaggerates. You don't have to pay attention to him." Chapter 4077. However, Yun Chujio reached out and grabbed Di Baiming's hand. She said word by word, "Idol, what I want is not a day and night of intimacy, but our future. So you go and do your work. I'm fine." Di Baiming held Yun Chujio's hand in his own. He wanted to say something, but he did not know where to start. He owed her too much. Any words would be useless. All he could do was to use all his methods, stand at the peak of this world and protect her for the rest of her life. The two of them looked at each other for a long time. Yun Chujio took the initiative to pull her hand out of Di Baiming's hand. She bared her little white teeth and said, "Idol, hurry up and leave. Just because I'm with you, I haven't gone out for a few days. It's suffocating me." Di Baiming naturally knew that Yun Chujio said this on purpose, but he did not expose her. He said cooperatively, "Cultivate well and don't get into trouble. Otherwise, I won't forgive you." In the past, Yun Chujio would snort in disdain when she heard these words. She thought that the gigolo was acting pretentious, but now it sounded full of reluctance and longing. There was also some sadness about parting. She tried her best to hold back the bitterness in her eyes. She squeezed out a smile and said, "I know. I'm such a quiet girl. How can I cause trouble?" Di Baiming did not say anything, but he hugged her tightly in his arms. A watery light flashed in his deep eyes. He finally understood what it meant to be, involuntarily. He really wanted to be by her side at all times, but for the sake of their future. For the people they cared about, they could only choose to part. In the end, he still did not say anything and turned around to leave. Yun Chujio looked at the afterimages that disappeared into the distance. She was stunned and did not say anything. For a moment, the courtyard was filled with a sad atmosphere. Even the drifters could feel it. They huddled on the swing and looked at Yun Chujio curiously. Dog 2 in the corner also shed a few tears. It was too touching, no, it was too touching. Was this love? While Yun Chujio was in a daze, the drifters sneaked into the house. Yun Chujio knew that someone was coming. She used her sleeve to wipe her face, because she didn't know when, but her face was already full of tears. Soon, the voices of Zhao Hui and the others came from outside the courtyard. "Junior sister Yun, we're here to see you." Zhao Hui and the others had been urging Yun Chujio to go to class for the past few days, but she refused on the grounds that she was sick. After some discussion, they decided to come and see her. Yun Chujio opened the courtyard door, and Zhao Hui and the others walked in. Zhao Hui saw that Yun Chujio's eyes were red, and he couldn't help but ask anxiously, "Junior sister Yun, what happened? Are you crying?" Li Zhuangji and the others also looked at her with concern. After experiencing so many things, they had already treated Yun Chujio as a life and death friend. Yun Chujio sighed and said, "I haven't been feeling well these few days. I have been sneezing, so my eyes have become like this." Although Zhao Hui and the others felt that what Yun Chujio said seemed to be a bit far-fetched, but when they thought of Yun Chujio's outgoing personality, they felt that she didn't seem like someone who would let them suffer silently, so they believed her. They asked a few more questions with concern and then began to chat. "Junior sister Yun, you haven't gone out these few days because you don't know that Liao Tao and the others have already spread the word that they will teach us a lesson in the inter-sect competition in a few days." Li Zhuangji curled his lips and said. Zhao Hui echoed, "Yes, there are already many people who are prepared to bet on the same day. After all, it's impossible for us to win. However, I reckon that no one will bet on US winning. Those people will bet for nothing." Chapter 4078 made her happy just thinking about it. When Yun Chujio heard their words, her heart skipped a beat. Without the gigolo by her side, it was not bad to earn some money to spend. Immediately, she said to Zhao Hui and the others, "Do you guys want to be rich?" Zhao Hui and the others rolled their eyes. Wasn't this nonsense? Who didn't want to be rich? Especially people like them who were heavily in debt. They wanted to be rich. However, how could they make a fortune?
In a few days, during the inter-sect competition, I will think of a way to be the last to appear. All of you bet on me to win. Bet as much money as you have. I guarantee that you will make a fortune. Yun Chuzhou said with a smile. Li Zhuangji and the others were dumbfounded. Are you sure that you will make a fortune and not lose everything? Li Zhuangji couldn't hold it in any longer. He asked, Junior Sister Yun, do you mean that you can beat Liao Tao? Although you have reached the 9th level of psychic power in the Eye of Sword Intent, Liao Tao is at the 5th level of psychic power, and you can't use any supporting techniques during the competition. How can you be his opponent? Yes, Junior Sister Yun. A wise man doesn't lose when the odds are against him. Let's not fight with him. We can challenge him again in the future, Zhao Hui advised. Yun Chuzhou blinked her eyes. Don't worry. I have my own way to defeat him. Just listen to me. Liao Tao and the others looked at each other. Although they felt that Yun Chuzhou was bragging, they did not dare to disobey her. They felt that they were going to be completely broke. The reason why Yun Chuzhou was so certain was very simple. Although she could not openly use support methods, she could use them secretly. Those drifters were giving her trouble. It was time for them to make a contribution. If there were too many of them, it would be easy for others to notice. 1 or 2 strands wouldn't be a problem. When the time came, Liao Tao would definitely lose his life. Just thinking about it made him happy. Zhao Hui knew that it was very difficult to change Yun Chuzhou's decision, so he didn't say anything more. Instead, he changed the topic and said, Oh right, Junior Sister Yun, something big happened these few days. The Flying Flower Island captured an extremely rare blue-tailed giant bone whale. Island Master Qi of the Flying Flower Island has sent an invitation to our Master Ouyang. He has agreed to hold a whale feast on the Flying Flower Island in half a month. It will definitely be a grand event. Yun Chuzhou curled her lips. Isn't it just a few old men eating and drinking together? What kind of grand event is this? By the way, the meat of the blue-tailed bone whale is very delicious. The corners of Zhao Hui and the others' eyes twitched. Your focus has gone astray, alright? A normal person's focus should be on the gathering of the leaders of the 6 great sections. On the other hand, her focus was on whether the blue-tailed bone whale was delicious or not. Junior Sister Yun, you might not know this, but every 5 years, the 6 great sects gather together. It's called a gathering, but it's really a sparring session. This year, it happens to be the Flying Flower Island's turn to be the host. Therefore, this so-called whale feast is just a gimmick. In reality, it's still a competition of strength between the 6 factions. However, every year, the 9 pavilions take first place, so the remaining 5 major factions can only compete for second place. In addition, this year's event is held on the Flying Flower Island, which is even more disadvantageous to our Nameless Sword sect. I reckon that the best ranking would be 4th place. After all, there's still the Ascension Island ahead. Zhao Hui explained. Yun Chuzhou finally came to a realization. However, she had seen too many such tricks. Moreover, they had nothing to do with small shrimps like her, so she just listened to them. It was a pity that she wouldn't be able to taste the blue-tailed bone whale. However, she could ask Old Man Duanmu and Old Man Dongfang to get some for her to try. Chapter 4079 failed to infuse sword intent. The few of them chatted for a while more before Zhao Hui and the others left. Yun Chuzhou blinked her eyes and decided to go to Elder Duanmu's place to brush her face. This way, after a few days, she would be able to ask him to bring back some whale meat for her to taste. When Yun Chuzhou arrived at Elder Duanmu's No. 1 Sword Forging Hall, this fellow first expressed his gratitude to Elder Duanmu in a serious manner. Then, he continued to chat with her. Although Elder Duanmu didn't pay much attention to her, he didn't chase her away and just let her talk. After a while, Elder Duanmu said, I heard that Liao Tao wants to challenge you. What do you plan to do? If you want to fight, then let's fight. Do you think I'm afraid of him? Yun Chuzhou said indifferently. Nonsense.
Your spiritual power is so much weaker than his, and he hates you. Once you fight, he will not show mercy. You might be seriously injured. How about this, you either admit defeat or forfeit on that day. Although your face is a little ugly, it's still better than getting injured. For someone with Elder Duenma's personality to be able to say so much, he had to say that he was really thinking about Yun Chujo. In fact, he was also puzzled. He had originally disliked this little girl, but for some reason, he now wanted to protect her. Perhaps it was because the toughness of her beating the sword billet in the inner sect selection had moved him, or perhaps it was because the little girl often came over these days. Although his shameless appearance gave him a headache, he had to say, it had been a long time since he had seen such a genuine child. Hearing Elder Duenma's words, Yun Chujo shook her head. I will not admit defeat or forfeit. That Liao Tao is not my match at all. Elder Duenma's face darkened when he saw Yun Chujia's shameless bragging. Nonsense. You're only at the 9th level of psychic power, but that Liao Tao is at the 5th level of psychic power. How can you be stronger than him? Yun Chujo smiled mischievously. That Liao Tao is brainless. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been the first to be kicked off the stage last time. I have my own ways to deal with him. Elder Duanmu, let's not talk about this matter for now. Can you tell me the steps to beat the sword billet? I originally wanted to consult Elder Dongfang, but I felt that your attainments were higher, so I decided to consult you. When Elder Duanmu heard Yun Chujo say that his attainments were higher than Elder Dongfang's, he immediately threw the matter of the competition to the back of his mind. His expression also eased up a lot, and he immediately told Yun Chujo the steps to forge the sword. In fact, Yun Chujo had also learned the method to forge a sword from Jian Feng. However, she had not been able to successfully infuse sword intent into it, and she had not had the chance to try it out even after leaving the sword hut. The reason she had asked Elder Duanmu for advice was to find an excuse. Otherwise, there was no way to explain that she knew how to forge a sword. She planned to find a way to repair Elder Duenma's heaven-cleaving sword after she had learned how to infuse sword intent into it. Seeing that Yun Chujo knew how to do it, Elder Duanmu was so happy that his beard stood up. He felt that this fellow was a genius in forging swords. How would he know that this fellow was tortured by Jian Feng? It was impossible for him not to know. However, when it came to infusing sword intent, Yun Chujo tried several times but failed. Elder Duanmu consoled her, this failure is very normal. All sword forgers need a very long time to succeed. If you practice more in the future, you will definitely succeed. Although Yun Chujo was a little annoyed, she still nodded. Perhaps she could succeed after practicing a few more times in the future. Chapter 4080, Fast or slow. As the sky was already dark, Yun Chujo left the No. 1 sword forging hall with a dejected expression. As she walked, she pondered over it. Her steps were all correct, so there was no reason for her to fail. Could it be that the chaotic sword intent she comprehended was too strange, so there was no way for her to successfully infuse it? When she thought of the sword intent, this fellow couldn't help but get angry. If it wasn't for the troublemakers, she might have been able to successfully infuse it into the eye of sword intent as well. When she arrived at the courtyard, she had just pushed open the door when the two groups of drifters came up to her. However, due to Di Baiming's warning, they didn't get too close and only jumped in front of her. Yun Chujo was in a bad mood because she didn't successfully infuse sword intent, therefore, she didn't have a good expression towards these drifters. It's all your fault. If it weren't for you guys, would I not be able to comprehend sword intent? Maybe if I knew 10 or 8 types of sword intent, I would be able to infuse sword intent successfully. Get lost. After saying that, Yun Chujo ignored the drifters and went straight into the house. The drifters were stunned for a moment before they gathered together as if they were discussing something. The next morning, before Yun Chujo got out of bed, her identity jade token started to tremble. Yun Chujo looked at it in annoyance and realized that it was from Elder Duanmu. The plan for the day lies in the morning. Quickly come over and practice your sword forging. Yun Chujo, What kind of madness is this old man Duanmu having? If she had known this would happen, she wouldn't have asked for sword forging on a whim yesterday. Now, she was being targeted. Although this fellow didn't want to go, Elder Duanmu was her backing now and she couldn't afford to offend him. Therefore, this fellow had no choice but to wash up and leave the house with a meat bun in his mouth. However, to her surprise, there were two red figures gathered in the courtyard. When they saw her coming out, the two figures began to compete with their swords. Of course, this sword was also formed from the red mist. Yun Chujiu was puzzled. Did the native Piao and the sword pool Piao start fighting again? Yun Chujiu originally did not intend to pay attention to them. However, just as she was about to leave, she was attracted by the fight between the two figures. The drifter of the sword pool had also transformed into a human figure to compete with Yun Chujiu. However, in order to accommodate Yun Chujiu, its speed and moves had been greatly reduced. At this time, when it competed with the native drifter, it was simply dazzling. The meat bun in Yun Chujiu's mouth fell to the ground. She had suffered a huge impact. So the sword could still be used like that? So the sword could be used in that way? So the seemingly simple and crude sword could actually have such great power? Looking at her, she realized that the sword pool drifter's sword speed was very fast, but the native drifter's speed was very slow. But even so, the two of them were actually unable to separate. What was going on? Wasn't there a saying that in the world of martial arts, speed was the only thing that could not be broken? How could the indigenous drifter be able to deal with it despite being so slow? This thought flashed through her mind as she realized that the sword pool drifter's sword speed had started to slow down. On the other hand, the indigenous drifter's sword speed had become as fast as the wind. The two of them were actually evenly matched. Following that, the two figures slowed down one moment and then sped up the next. At times, they were extremely slow and at other times, they were as fast as lightning. However, no matter how the other party changed, the other party would be able to find a corresponding solution. The more Yun Chujiu watched, the more fascinated she became. She had long forgotten about the matter of Elder Duanmu looking for her. In the end, she could not help but take out a treasured sword and wave it around. Chapter 4081, The practice method of the fast sword intent. Yun Chujiu only imitated the movements of the two drifters in the beginning, but later on, she was immersed in her own thoughts. She vaguely felt that the two drifters were instructing her on something. Could it be the sword intent? One fast and one slow. Could it be the fast sword intent and the slow sword intent? She could understand one of the drifters using the fast sword that was as fast as the wind. After all, in the world of martial arts, speed was the only thing that could not be broken. However, why was the other drifter still able to withstand the slow sword technique? Yun Chujiu could not figure it out no matter what. Hence, she temporarily put down the slow sword technique and began to ponder over the fast sword techniques of the drifters. If she could master the fast sword intent, it would be wonderful. However, what exactly was the fast sword intent? Fast gusts of wind, lightning bolts, and waterfalls flashed through Yun Chujiu's mind. These were undoubtedly fast. Could it be that she had to increase the deceleration speed to such a fast speed to master the fast sword intent? Yun Chujiu felt that it was too difficult. Her spiritual power could not be compared to the drifters, and her movement techniques were not as agile as the drifters. How could she possibly reach their sword speed? The more Yun Chujiu thought about it, the more she felt that it was impossible. Just when she was at a loss, her identity jade token started to tremble again. She impatiently sent her spiritual sense in. Elder Duanmu's displeased voice came from inside. Didn't you say that you were going to come over to train your sword? Why aren't you here yet? Yun Chujiu, when did she say that she was going to come over? This fellow shook his head. Since he was at a loss, it wouldn't be too bad to ask old man Duanmu for advice. Therefore, she put away the tree branches and left the courtyard without caring about the drifters on the swings. When she arrived at Elder Duanmu's place, it was already close to noon. Elder Duemma's face was gloomy, and it was obvious that he was very dissatisfied with Yun Chujia's tardiness. Yun Chujio hurriedly said, Elder Duanmu, I didn't mean to be late. It's because I suddenly gained some insight into sword intent when I was about to leave. Hearing that, Elder Duanmu hurriedly asked, You have gained insight into sword intent? What sword intent? Yun Chujio laughed dryly. I just have some clues, but I haven't completely comprehended it. I was just about to ask for your advice. Elder Duanmu frowned. He felt that Yun Chujio was most likely lying to cover up her lateness, so he asked with some suspicion, Then tell me, what have you comprehended? In the world of martial arts, speed is the only thing that cannot be broken. What I've comprehended is the fast sword intent, but after thinking about it, how can my sword technique be as fast as lightning and sudden wind? So, is it impossible to comprehend the fast sword intent? Yun Chujio said with a little confusion. Hearing Yun Chujio's words, Elder Duanmu knew that she had indeed comprehended something. His expression eased up a little and he said, The fast sword intent is the sword intent that the disciples of our nameless sword sect have comprehended the most. It is also the sword intent that is the easiest to comprehend. If you want to comprehend the fast sword intent, it is useless to just ponder about it. Then what should we do? Yun Chujio's eyes lit up. Did this mean that there was a quick method? Many disciples will go to the waterfall at the back of the mountain to practice their sword speed and comprehend the fast sword intent. If your sword speed is fast enough to pass through the waterfall and there isn't a drop of water on your sword, then you won't be far from comprehending the sword intent. Of course, this is only a supplementary method. It mainly depends on your own comprehension ability, Elder Duanmu said. Chapter 4082, Waterfall. Yun Chujio was dumbfounded when she heard Elder Duanmu's words. Why did this method sound so unreliable? Wasn't there a saying that said that water flows faster when it is cut off by a knife? How could it not be stained by water droplets? However, she felt that Elder Duanmu was not a person who would spout nonsense, so she temporarily memorized this method. Then, she asked, Elder Duanmu, besides the fast sword intent, is there also the slow sword intent? The fast sword intent was still understandable, but how could the slow sword intent be explained? His sword was as slow as a tortoise. How could he possibly win against the rabbit? Elder Duanmu was stunned by this strange analogy, but he still said, Of course there is the slow sword intent, but very few people can master the slow sword intent, and I haven't seen through the profoundness of it. I advise you to focus on comprehending the fast sword intent. After all, the slow sword intent is too difficult. Yun Chujio blinked her eyes. Then, is it possible to master these two sword intents at the same time? Elder Duanmu was so angry that he was amused. This is simply wishful thinking. Speed and slowness cannot be reconciled. Even if a person can master 2 or even 3 or 5 sword intents, it is impossible to master the two opposing sword intents of speed and slowness. You should give up on this idea as soon as possible and focus on studying the fast sword intent. Although Yun Chujio agreed obediently on the surface, she pursed her lips in her heart. This ignorant old man. The drifter had already mastered the two sword intents of speed and slowness, and he switched between them very casually. It seemed that the drifter had a much more thorough understanding of sword intents than old man Duanmu. However, the drifter did not know how to speak, which was very difficult to deal with. Seeing that Yun Chujio was absent-minded, Elder Duanmu knew that it would be useless even if he kept her here to train his sword. Thus, he said to her, Since you have some idea of how to comprehend the fast sword intent, then go to the waterfall at the back of the mountain and practice your sword. Yun Chujio originally had no interest in training her sword, so she immediately skipped away. Yun Chujio found the waterfall that Elder Duanmu had mentioned. She did not expect that there were many disciples gathered near the waterfall. They were practicing their sword in the pool below the waterfall, and they were all drenched like drowned chickens. The corner of Yun Chujio's eyes twitched. Well, it seemed that old man Duanmu didn't lie to her. This was indeed a good place to comprehend the fast sword intent. A few disciples saw Yun Chuzhou coming over and couldn't help but whisper, "The inner sect competition is in 2 days. Is Yun Chuzhou planning to grasp the fast sword intent at the last minute?" Is there a need to say that? However, let's not talk about whether she can successfully comprehend it or not. Even if she does, she won't be a match for Liao Tao. She will definitely be beaten up badly by Liao Tao. Definitely. I heard that Liao Tao was so angry that he almost vomited blood because she snatched the right to go to the Eye of Sword intent. She will definitely not let her off easily. Yun Chuzhou did not pay attention to these gossips. Her gaze was a little lost as she looked at the waterfall that was rushing down. Could the speed of the sword be faster than the speed of water? This answer was unintentionally affirmative. Based on the speed of the two drifters' sword, it was completely possible to achieve it. However, with her current spiritual power level, it was impossible to achieve it. Could it be that she could only wait until her spiritual power level increased before she could comprehend the fast sword intent? Those disciples saw that Yun Chuzhou was just standing by the pool in a daze and did not jump into the waterfall to practice her sword. They even laughed out loud. This Yun Chuzhou probably only realized it now. According to her level of spiritual power, it's impossible for her to comprehend the fast sword intent. That's not necessarily true. Didn't she already grasp the chaotic sword intent before? Maybe she can comprehend it just by looking at the waterfall. Ha ha ha. That's right. If she can comprehend the quick sword intent just by looking at the waterfall, then my surname isn't Lu. Chapter 4083. Let's spar. Yun Chuzhou turned a deaf ear to these jeers. On the contrary, when she heard them mention the chaotic sword intent, her heart skipped a beat. If the fast sword intent could only be comprehended when one reached an extreme speed, then if she wanted to comprehend the chaotic sword intent, wouldn't she have to reach the extreme disorder? However, that wasn't the case. Back then, when she was randomly brandishing her sword, she had sensed the order in the disorder and obtained victory in the disorder. Then, she had vaguely comprehended the chaotic sword intent. As Yun Chuzhou thought about it, it was like opening a new door. The so-called comprehension of the sword intent was an instant of clarity. It was not really about how much she wanted to practice the sword. If the fast sword intent was not about practicing the sword to the extreme speed, then what was it? Yun Chuzhou suddenly had an epiphany. She thought of the most appropriate word, relative. That's right, it was relative. It was not absolutely fast. The so-called speed was not about how fast you had to use your sword, as long as you could be faster than your opponent. With her current level of spiritual power, it was naturally impossible for her to practice faster than the speed of a waterfall, but she could definitely be faster than her opponent. In order to be faster than her opponent, even if her spiritual power was lower than her opponent's, she could completely do it. That was to predict the opponent's sword moves in advance. The more Yun Chuzhou thought about it, the more excited she became. She was completely immersed in her own thoughts. The disciples practicing the sword in the waterfall saw Yun Chuzhou standing by the pool, frowning and laughing at the same time. They thought to themselves, has she lost her mind? At this moment, Yun Chuzhou pointed at the disciple who said that she had mastered the fast sword intent and was not surnamed Lu and said, "This senior brother who is not surnamed Lu, come out. Let's have a spar." Everyone burst into laughter when they heard Yun Chuzhou's words. The disciple whose surname was Liu's face turned red. "Yun Chuzhou, don't you know that disciples are not allowed to fight in private? You are framing me. We are not fighting. We are just sparring. It doesn't matter even if we go to the discipline hall. Don't tell me that you don't dare to have a spar with me." Yun Chuzhou crossed her arms and said mockingly. How could the disciple with the surname Lu admit defeat? Moreover, his spiritual power level was at the 3rd level of Spirit Absent Realm. Although he couldn't be compared to Liao Tao and the others, he was still 3 levels higher than Yun Chuzhou. Naturally, he was confident. However, he still said, "Sparring is fine, but it's just a sword technique sparring. You can't use those messy things of yours." Yun Chujo smiled lightly and said, "Of course. Not only do I not use those things, but I also don't know how to use the sword intent of chaos. Do you dare to compete with me?" Hearing Yun Chuji's words, the disciple surnamed Lu sneered and said, "Since you want to humiliate yourself, then I will grant you your wish." After saying that, the disciple surnamed Lu came up from the pool and walked to an empty space not far from the pool. The other disciples who practiced swordsmanship also stopped practicing swordsmanship and gathered around to watch a good show. They felt that Yun Chujo was so arrogant that she did not know what was good for her. Did she really think that she could win every time with bad water? She was going to be unlucky today. The disciple surnamed Lu knew that Yun Chujo was full of evil, so he did not say anything more and directly took out his treasured sword and stabbed at Yun Chuji's throat. While Yun Chujo dodged, the treasured sword in her hand also stabbed at the vital point of the disciple surnamed Lu. Soon, more than 10 moves had passed, but the two of them did not have a winner. The onlookers were somewhat impressed by Yun Chujo. Although Yun Chuji's spiritual power was low, her movement was fast enough. However, her spiritual power was low, and she would fall into a disadvantage sooner or later, unless she used the sword intent of chaos. However, she had already said before that she would not use the sword intent of chaos, so she would definitely lose. Chapter 4084. She had comprehended the fast sword intent. The disciple surnamed Lu had a smug look on his face. Although this Yun Chujo was stronger than he had imagined, it had only been 10 moves. He had enough confidence to defeat her. Thinking of this, the disciple surnamed Lu tightened the sword technique in his hand and abruptly increased his offense. Yun Chuji's eyes deepened. If she had used the sword technique she had learned from the cliff, she would have been able to defeat her opponent. However, she wanted to try out the idea of the fast sword intent that she had comprehended previously. She had a premonition that she was only a layer away from comprehending the fast sword intent. During the process of exchanging blows, she might be able to break through this layer of shackles. Hence, Yun Chuji's sword moves also began to accelerate. To be exact, every time she attacked, it was just a coincidence that she was slightly faster than the disciple with the surname Lu. However, it was this slight difference that caused the disciple with the surname Lu to instantly fall into a disadvantageous position. He was extremely vexed. Why did Yun Chujo, who was on the opposite side, use a sword move that he had already deciphered before he had even used his sword move? Could it be that she knew how to predict it? Those disciples who were watching the show had also seen through the trick and were shocked. Normally, the two of them would fight according to their moves. How could Yun Chujo have prepared a deciphering move in advance like this? This Yun Chujo was really strange. How did she determine the opponent's sword move? Yun Chujo naturally could not calculate. However, she had already learned the sword technique on the cliff. The 7 stars sword technique used by the disciple surnamed Lu was simply too simple for her. As long as she put in a little effort, she would be able to guess his next sword move. This fellow felt that even if he could not comprehend the fast sword intent, it was not bad to have such a harvest. It seemed that no matter what he did, he had to use his brain. Perhaps it was because he had relaxed his state of mind, but this fellow's sword technique was even faster and as swift as the wind. He did not even need to specially think about the other party's next move. He could already use the method to break it before the other party made his move. Yun Chujo felt that this was too interesting. As a result, this fellow had completely forgotten about this sparring match. He had also forgotten about the disciple with the surname Lu. He had even forgotten about the other disciples around him. His entire body and mind were immersed in a mysterious state. She was happy, but it was hard on that disciple with the surname Lu. In the beginning, he was annoyed that Yun Chujo could always guess his next move. However, he did not even have the time to be annoyed because Yun Chuji's swordsmanship had suddenly become faster. Moreover, there was a substantial sword intent around him. He was forced to retreat repeatedly and was so angry that he cursed, "Yun Chujo, you said that you wouldn't use the sword intent of chaos, why didn't you keep your word?" However, Yun Chujo was immersed in a mysterious feeling, so she naturally couldn't hear his shout. Moreover, the sword was even faster than the wind as it stabbed towards the disciple named Lu. The disciple with the surname Lu was forced into a corner. He could only jump into the pool to escape from Yun Chujia's attack. Although Yun Chujio was in a mysterious state, she was instinctively alert to danger. Therefore, when she reached the pool, she did not continue to chase after her. Instead, she began to practice her sword. The disciple with the surname Lu gritted his teeth and cursed in the pool. It was nothing more than saying that Yun Chujio did not keep her word. Finally, a disciple who was watching the show said, "Junior brother Lu, stop shouting. I don't think Yun Chujio used the sword intent of chaos at all. It looks like the fast sword intent." Yeah, I've seen someone use the fast sword intent before. Although it doesn't seem to be the same as what Yun Chujio used, it's not far from the truth. TSK, I didn't expect her to comprehend the fast sword intent after standing by the waterfall for a while. It's so infuriating. Chapter 4085, You Are Catching Fish. The disciple surnamed Lu could not help but be dumbstruck as he listened to the discussions of the crowd. He raised his head to look at Yun Chujio, who was practicing her sword. There was already a sword intent that seemed to be corporeal around her body, and the speed at which she was practicing her sword was getting faster and faster. He could only see the afterimages. Could it be that she had really comprehended the fast sword intent? The disciple surnamed Lu recalled what he had once said. If Yun Chujio had comprehended the fast sword intent, his surname would not be Lu. He immediately wished that he could find a hole to hide in. He was afraid that Yun Chujio would ridicule him after she woke up. He could not care about anything else and immediately climbed out of the pool, wanting to escape. However, just as he climbed ashore, Yun Chujio's sword arrived. It almost scared him to death. He quickly jumped back into the pool. Yun Chujio, are you crazy? We agreed to spar. Are you trying to kill me? The disciple with the surname Lu shouted in anger. However, Yun Chujio did not react at all and continued to practice her sword. The disciple thought that Yun Chujio would not attack him anymore, so he climbed up again and was scared back into the water. The disciple was so angry that he almost died. This Yun Chujio was doing it on purpose. A disciple who was watching the show said, "She may not want to kill you, but she has fallen into a mysterious state. Her remaining consciousness is still competing with you, so when she saw you appear, she naturally wanted to compete with you." Although the disciple with the surname Lu was so angry that he was twitching, he could only accept this explanation. However, the sky was about to turn dark. If this damn Yun Chujio did not wake up, would he have to stay in the water? If he stayed in the water until the next morning, he would turn into a seaweed. Fortunately, after 4 hours, Yun Chujio woke up. She looked at the sky and then looked at the disciple with the surname Lu who was gnashing his teeth in the pool. She said in puzzlement, Senior brother Lu, aren't we competing with swords? Why did you jump into the water? To catch fish. The disciple named Lu was so angry that he almost vomited blood. Catch fish. He was almost soaked into a fish. A disciple beside her asked tentatively, "Junior sister Yun, have you comprehended the fast sword intent?" Yun Chujio nodded. "Yes, it's all thanks to your advice. Thank you very much. See you later." Yun Chujio left happily. Those disciples looked at each other. It was all thanks to their advice. How did they give her advice? If they had the ability, they would have comprehended the fast sword intent long ago. Damn it, this person could not be compared to others. They had been practicing their swordplay here day and night without any gains. That pervert had comprehended the fast sword intent after staying here for a while. It was really unreasonable. However, when they saw the disciple surnamed Lu who had just crawled out of the water, they felt that they were at least a little stronger than him. This person was really unlucky. On the other side, Yun Chujio's heart was filled with joy. Although she had yet to make any progress with the slow sword intent, it was still not bad for her to have mastered the fast sword intent. This incident had reminded her of one thing. She could not always stay in the courtyard behind closed doors. If she were to come out and interact with people more often, she might gain additional benefits. The disciples of the Nameless Swords sect would not have thought that just because this fellow had such an idea, they would be unlucky in the future. This fellow soon arrived at his own courtyard. After pushing open the courtyard door, the drifters swarmed over as usual. It was rare for Yun Chujo to smile at them like a spring breeze. "Little babies, your performance today was not bad. In the future, if you have nothing to do, practice your swordsmanship. It'll get you some more fun things." Although the two groups of drifters did not know what Yun Chujo meant by fun things, they still floated around Yun Chujo cheerfully. Chapter 4086 Was it because the road was uneven? The next day, Yun Chujo woke up early in the morning and began to fiddle around in the yard. This guy thought that since these drifters liked swings, they would definitely like seesaws and slides. Therefore, he spent nearly 2 days to make a few seesaws and a big slide. However, before the drifters could play, this guy had already played with Buttface dozens of times. Buttface was full of praise. "Little fairy, you are so talented. I, Buttface, have never admired anyone, but I am full of admiration for you. I love you so much that I can't extricate myself." Yun Chujo couldn't be bothered with him. Just when she was having fun, the drifters slipped into the house. Yun Chujo knew that someone was coming. She didn't need to look to know that it must be Li Zhuangji and the others. Sure enough, after a while, they heard the voices of Li Zhuangji and the others. After Yun Chujo opened the courtyard door, Li Zhuangji and the others walked into the courtyard. However, when they saw the seesaw and slide in the courtyard, they were dumbfounded. "Junior sister Yun, you said yesterday that you had something important to do. Could it be that you're building these things?" Zhao Hui asked with a stiff expression. Yun Chujo nodded proudly. "That's right. How do you think I'm doing? Let me tell you, I'm a good carpenter who has been delayed by cultivation." The corners of everyone's eyes twitched. "Junior sister Yun, you better watch out. Tomorrow is the day of the inner sect competition. You actually have the time to build these things. Aren't you a little too ambitious?" After an awkward silence, Zhao Hui asked, "Junior sister Yun, I heard that you have comprehended the fast sword intent. Although you have already comprehended 2 sword intents, you are still not Liao Tao's match. Are you really confident of winning? Why don't you admit defeat just like us?" Yun Chujo smiled lightly and said, "Of course I'm confident. You guys just follow my instructions. If you win this time, I won't withhold the money and keep it for your wives to use." Zhao Hui and the others, however, seeing that she was so relaxed, they couldn't say anything more. They chatted for a while and then left. However, just as they left the house, they felt like dogs gnawing on mud. It was a crisp fall. Li Zhuangji muttered, "It's really strange. How come when I come to junior sister Yun's place, my legs don't listen to me? I've fallen so many times. Yeah, could it be that the road is uneven? It looks quite flat too. It's really strange." Yun Chujo, who was in the courtyard, heard their muttering and the corner of her mouth twitched. It wasn't the road that was uneven, it was all the work of the drifters. They simply felt that Li Zhuangji and the others had disturbed them from playing with their new toys. This was their revenge. However, this reminded her. Therefore, after Li Zhuangji and the others had gone far away, Yun Chujo waved at the 2 groups of drifters who were having a great time. After saying a few words, those drifters immediately jumped up and seemed to be gloating. The next day, the monthly inner sect competition began. Everyone was waiting for a big show. It was the battle of revenge between Liao Tao and the others. After Li Zhuangji and the other 3 entered the arena, they directly admitted defeat. Although it was a little embarrassing, everyone was not surprised. In any case, they would lose even if they fought, so they might as well just admit defeat. At the very least, they would not get hurt. Could it be that this big show of revenge was over just like that? At this moment, Liao Tao entered the arena. His opponent was naturally Yun Chuzhou. Everyone shook their heads. They reckoned that Yun Chuzhou would also admit defeat voluntarily. It was really boring. Chapter 4087 was lacking such a disciple. Just as everyone was guessing, the bed in the southeast corner of the square exploded. There was no other reason. Not only did Zhao Hui help Yun Chuzhou bet 5 million upper-grade spirit stones, but each of them also bet 1 million upper-grade spirit stones on Yun Chuzhou's win. After everyone was stunned, two thoughts suddenly appeared in their minds. One was that it seemed that Yun Chuzhou would not admit defeat. She was going to fight to the death with Liao Tao. The second thought was, the opportunity to make a fortune has come. Therefore, the gambling game was extremely popular. In order to let everyone finish betting, the manager in charge of the gambling game specially informed Manager Gao, who was in charge of the competition, to delay the start of the competition. Manager Gao was naturally happy to do a favor by following the flow. He secretly shook his head. The last time he saw Yun Chuzhou, she was quite smart. Why was she so unwise this time? It would have been fine if she had just admitted defeat, but she still insisted on fighting. It would have been fine if she had fought, but she had actually thrown so many spirit stones. Wasn't this digging a hole for herself? Just as Manager Gao was thinking, he saw Elder Duanmu and Elder Dongfang coming over. The two of them were still worried, so they came over to take a look. If Liao Tao wanted to kill her, at least they could save Yun Chuzhou's life. Yun Chuzhou saw that her two strong supporters had come. She jumped over to brush her face for a while, and then she walked in front of the arrogant Liao Tao. Senior brother Liao, I advise you to admit defeat now. Otherwise, if you lose to me again, how will you face others? Yun Chuzhou said with a smile. Liao Tao hated her to death. He gnashed his teeth and said, Yun Chuzhou, I won't talk nonsense with you. When the competition begins, I will make you regret it. Yun Chuzhou shrugged her shoulders. She was a very kind person. She had already advised him so sincerely. Since he still didn't give up, then it wasn't her fault. This guy narrowed his eyes and glanced at the two drifters who were hiding in the corner of the competition stage. His heart was filled with joy. With the help of the drifters, it would be a piece of cake to deal with this Liao Tao. It was a pity. For some reason, after these drifters left the Eye of Sword Intent and the Nameless Sword Sect, they could only hide in the puppet plate. Otherwise, who would dare to provoke her? They wouldn't die. After a while, the bet was over, and Manager Gao rang the copper bell that signified the start of the competition. Liao Tao didn't say anything and directly raised his sword to stab. Yun Chuzhou didn't directly let the two drifters attack. After all, Elder Duanmu and Elder Dongfang were watching from not far away. She had to let Liao Tao lose without leaving a trace. Moreover, this fellow also wanted to test the power of the swift sword intent that she had mastered and the chaotic sword intent. Hence, she focused her attention on fighting with Liao Tao. Elder Duanmu had just heard that Yun Chuzhou had comprehended the swift sword intent. He was very gratified. This little girl's comprehension was not bad. She had actually comprehended the swift sword intent. However, even if she had comprehended two types of sword intent, she would still not be a match for Liao Tao. She would definitely lose, but only for a short period of time. Elder Dongfang's thoughts were similar to Elder Duanmu's. He said in a low voice, although this little girl is definitely going to lose this competition, I have to say that this little girl's rate of improvement is really astonishing. Although her spiritual power is a little low now, this is not a problem. She will definitely become a great disciple in the future. This old man is lacking such a disciple. Hearing Elder Dongfang's words, Elder Duanmu became a little wary. This old man wasn't thinking of taking the little girl as his successor disciple, was he? No, he had to strike first and find an opportunity to settle this matter first so that this old man wouldn't snatch it away. Chapter 4088, the power of the drifter. Just as Elder Duanmu was thinking about this, he heard the exclamations of the crowd. He looked up and saw that Yun Chujo had been forced to the edge of the competition stage by Liao Tao. Was she going to lose? Liao Tao's face revealed a vicious expression as he raised his sword and stabbed towards Yun Chujia's heart. The humiliation that this wretched girl had brought to him was finally going to be washed away. Even if this strike did not take her life, it would still cause her serious injuries. Elder Duanmu and Elder Dongfang both stood up. Just as they were about to attack, they saw Yun Chujo activate her swift sword intent. A layer of sword intent appeared in front of her body and blocked Liao Tao's treasured sword. Elder Duanmu shook his head. If it was an ordinary attack, she would have no problem blocking it with her sword intent. However, Liao Tao had also used his swift sword intent in this move. With the two counteracting each other, she was still unable to dodge this move. Elder Duanmu raised his hand and was about to push Liao Tao back when he was surprised to find that Yun Chujo had another layer of sword intent in front of her. It was the chaotic sword intent. How was this possible? Although there were many people who could comprehend more than two types of sword intent, he had never heard of anyone who could use two types of sword intent at the same time and superimpose their effects. Was he seeing things? Elder Duanmu wasn't the only one. Elder Dongfang, who was beside him, was also dumbfounded. He even pinched Elder Duanmu fiercely. Elder Duanmu grimaced in pain and said exasperatedly, "Why did you pinch me?" Elder Dongfang laughed dryly. I'm sorry. I wanted to pinch myself, but I accidentally pinched the wrong one." Elder Duanmu, however, he did not have the time to compete with Elder Dongfang right now. He stared intently at the situation on the stage. Liao Tao was obviously very surprised as well. His sword was forcefully blocked by Yun Chujia's dual sword intent. Yun Chujo took advantage of the time when he was in a daze to leap out of his attack range. This fellow was also very confused. She was totally in a hurry just now. She had already thought it through. If the two sword intents could not be stacked together, she would not have the time to use Xiao Hanyo. She could only let the little black bird curse. She did not expect that the sword intents could really be stacked together. Did she discover something amazing? Just when this guy was feeling pleased with himself, he never thought that the two wisps of Xiao Hanyo would hate Liao Tao because of what had happened just now. They did not wait for Yun Chujo to make an attack gesture and directly floated in front of Liao Tao. However, Liao Tao was just about to attack Yun Chujo, so he was in deep trouble. Liao Tao's entire body lay firmly on the stage, and the treasured sword in his hand directly flew off the stage. Everyone was shocked by this unexpected turn of events. Oh my, is this Liao Tao intimidated by Yun Chujia's sword intent just now? Why is he even prostrating himself? Forget it, if he did it on purpose, would he lose the sword in his hand? He must have been scared, so his steps were unsteady, and he fell. TSK, although Yun Chujia's sword intent is quite abnormal, isn't Liao Tao too timid? He was so scared that his legs went soft. Liao Tao almost vomited blood when he heard the crowd's discussion. He also wanted to know what the hell was going on. How did he fall down all of a sudden? However, he reacted very quickly. He was afraid that Yun Chujo would use this opportunity to attack him, so he immediately rolled on the ground and left Yun Chujia's attack range. However, when he was about to jump up, he fell heavily onto the ground. Moreover, because he used too much strength, his front teeth were knocked off. Chapter 4089 did not make a loss. Liao Tao stared blankly at the two front teeth that had left him on the ground. He was completely dumbfounded. Who was he? Where was he? What was he doing? He was only at the 5th level of Spirit Absent Realm, but he had actually fallen down twice in a row. This was simply making people laugh their heads off. Not far away, although Yun Chujo was somewhat dumbfounded by the two wisps of Drifter's performance, it was fortunate that she reacted very quickly. Just as Liao Tao was staring at the front teeth in a daze, she leaped over and kicked him under the competition stage. After a moment of silence, everyone exploded. Oh my, the competition is over. Liao Tao is too useless, right? He was actually scared to such an extent by Yun Chujia's stacked sword intent. TSK, no wonder he lost so miserably in the last competition. He is too timid. Exactly, if he was not scared out of his wits, he would not have fallen twice in a row. His legs are so scared that they are weak. Although Liao Tao really wanted to faint, other than his front teeth being broken, he didn't suffer any injuries. He couldn't faint even if he wanted to. Yun Chujiu glared at the two drifters who were already hiding in the corner. She first confirmed the results of the competition, then walked in front of Elder Duanmu and Elder Dongfang. Elder Dongfang's eyes were filled with praise. Little girl, how did you manage to stack the sword intent? Yun Chujiu gave a brief explanation before saying, at that time, I tried to release 2 sword intents consecutively in a moment of desperation. I didn't expect that it could really stack. This was also a coincidence. When Elder Dongfang and Elder Duanmu heard this, they tried to release the sword intent according to Yun Chujia's method. However, they were unable to stack the 2 sword intents. The 2 old men could not help but sigh. Could it be that this little girl was the only one who could superimpose the sword intents? The 2 of them did not stay any longer. After giving Yun Chujiu a few more instructions, they left. Yun Chujiu also left the competition stage happily. After taking a few steps, Liao Tao stood in front of her with a ferocious look on his face. Yun Chujiu, just you wait. However, due to the broken front teeth, Liao Tao's pronunciation of these words was a little strange. Not only did it not have a threatening effect, but it also attracted the laughter of the surrounding crowd. Liao Tao was so angry that he almost vomited blood. He glared at Yun Chujiu for a few times before he was persuaded to leave by a few disciples he was on good terms with. However, Zhao Hui, Li Zhuangji, and the others were extremely excited. They had struck it rich. They escorted Yun Chujiu to the gambling house to collect a large amount of spirit stones. Then, they went to the cafeteria to have a big meal before they separated. When Yun Chujiu returned to the courtyard, the 2 wisps of drifters behind her also floated in with a smug look. They felt that they were awesome. Unexpectedly, Yun Chujiu pointed at them and said fiercely, "Who asked you to make the decision on your own accord?" Putting aside the fact that it would affect me, Elder Dongfang and Elder Duanmu were sitting at one side of the competition stage. They were so close to each other, and the 2 of you were acting like demons. Weren't you afraid of being discovered? Are you fearless or are you brainless? You 2 idiots. Fuck off. The 2 wisps of Piaotu suddenly did not show off before, Piaotu to the corner, the rest of the Piaotu is a look of schadenfreude. Yun Chujiu ignored them and went straight into the house. Xiao Hanyo of Spirit Beast Bag Inside Incomprehension asks, Master, don't you hate those Pia Piao very much? How do you still fear them to be discovered? If they are discovered, I'm afraid I won't be able to get away with it either. Moreover, these Xiao Hanyo tortured me so miserably before. Now that I finally have some use for them, if anything happens to them, won't I lose my life? I won't do such a loss-making business. Yun Chujiu said faintly, you're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.